March 4th, 2016.
You want me to read this?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. OMG, he's an idiot.
May 4th, 2016.
Now the pressure really starts to finish MYE.
July 19th, 2016.
Hi, how was Trump other than a douche? Melania?
July 21st, 2016.
Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be.
August 6th, 2016.
I don't believe I wrote this text, sir.
Okay, it's been attributed to you, so we'll go on to the next.
Incorrect.
August 8th, 2016.
Again.
And I'll preface it by saying this for context. Ms. Page said, not ever going to become president, right? Right?
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
Repeat that again.
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
August 15th, 2016.
I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
On October 20th, 2016.
I can't pull away what the, and I defer to the chairman whether
You
or not
can just use one letter if you don't mind.
What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Okay, read it again that way.
Sir, did you not, was it
I
not
just wanted to
intelligible?
hear it
You
one
just
more
want to
time.
hear it for me to repeat it?
Please.
Okay, sir. Sure. Happy to indulge you. I can't pull away what the F happened to our country, Lise.
Why in the world do you believe that this committee should not ask for the record of similar text from your private account to find out what else you might have said about insurance policies or about the President of the United States or investigation? That is a rhetorical question you need not answer, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I nonetheless answer?
You may respond briefly, even though he said it was a rhetorical question.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Congressman, what I think is critical, and I'm glad you brought up a lot of these because I would like to make the point that
I didn't bring them up. I just asked you to read your own words.
Sir, if I may, what is important is that these texts represent personal beliefs just like those that you'd find on my personal phone. What these texts do not represent is any act, any suggestion of an act, any consideration that we need to do this or not do this. And furthermore, I would encourage you, as I believe I forget who I said this to earlier this morning, you need to read these texts in the context of what was going on at the time. So when I make the comment about Trump having no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be, that came on the heels of a speech where then candidate Trump said he didn't know whether or not the United States should honor its commitment to mutual defense under NATO.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. That's not briefly, Mr. Chairman. In light of these actual,
no.
Give him that opportunity.
Everyone will suspend. I told the gentleman he could answer briefly. He has answered briefly.
He has not finished answering.
We will now turn to the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C. for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In order to allow this witness to continue, let me ask a question. Mr. Strzok, you are a senior, or were a senior and experienced FBI staff person. Is that not right?
I would consider myself a senior and experienced FBI staff person, yes.
Now, you had been involved in the Mueller investigation of the last election involving Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump at the highest level. Is that not the case?
If you mean by highest level that I had interactions with those cases with the director and deputy director and senior staff of the Department of Justice, yes.
That's what I mean. Now, we've been reading from your personal phone and your official phone. Did it occur to you that your personal political messages, if they became public, might be misinterpreted in light of your role in the investigation?
Congresswoman, to be very honest, I didn't anticipate that because I never thought these texts would become public.
Well, even though they were, some of them were not on your personal phone.
Oh, correct. Yes, that's correct.
So that means anything that's on your official phone, of course, belongs to the public. I just want to establish that this this confusion between your public and private phone is part of our problem here today. Now, as we hold this hearing, I just want to note for the record that President Trump is on his way to a very controversial meeting with Vladimir Putin. Let me ask you, sir, about a undisputed finding of the Intelligence Committee, and by that I mean the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. These people do not usually speak in such absolute terms, so hear them. We assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have a high confidence in these judgments. Are these conclusions familiar to you, sir?
They are.
Are you aware of any finding that undermines these conclusions of the three intelligence committees?
I am not.
The Senate committee on the other side of the Capitol, under the leadership of a Republican chairman, Richard Burr, and not split in the way our own Intelligence Committee here in the House, has made a bipartisan finding affirming the Intelligence Committee's assessments. And I want to quote just briefly from them that the three committees, the Intelligence Commission assessment is a, quote, sound intelligence product. Now, let me indicate something that I had not known before preparing for this hearing, that they not only cited the usual context here in the United States, they quoted public Russian leadership commentary, Russian media reports, all aligned with the body of our intelligence reporting. Were you aware of the confluence of what the Russians were saying and what our own intelligence sources are saying?
I believe I understand your question to be between the intelligence community sources and methods and open source reporting, including those from Russia. Yes, I was aware of all those things coming together at the same time.
Do you have any reason to believe that the Senate Intelligence Committee or the NSA or the CIA or the FBI or the Office of the Division of Intelligence are on some kind of an effort to discredit President Donald Trump?
Not
The gentlelady's time has expired, but you may answer the question.
No, not at all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were involved in investigating both the matter of Hillary Clinton's private email server and the so-called Russian collusion matter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Page was also involved in both those. Is that correct?
She was not a member of the investigative team for either. She was a senior staff member for Mr. McCabe, who I believe began
But somebody you
as
were
deputy
communicating with on a fairly regular basis
Yes, sir.
on these matters. Thank you. And you would agree, would you not, that both investigations were supposed to be fair and unbiased?
Yes, and that they were.
Yet you were both rooting for Hillary Clinton to win, and you both detested Donald Trump. Did you not?
I think that's fair to say.
And in fact, as we've learned, you apparently found Donald Trump's supporters detestable too, like those around Loudoun, Virginia, as we've already heard, whom you called ignorant blanks. I'm not going to say that here. And that you had visited a Southern Virginia Walmart and could smell the Trump support. Now, I have to say, when I read those communications and when I hear them here, those between the two of you, specifically what you had to say about Trump supporters, it reminded me of something that Hillary Clinton had said about Trump supporters. She found them, what did she call them? Deplorables. And I would submit that it was your and Hillary Clinton's smug view of Donald Trump's supporters that was truly deportable. Don't you think that the American people, when they're paying your salaries, when they're paying for a fair and unbiased investigation by none other than the FBI, deserved a whole lot better than what those comments I just referred to reflect?
Congressman, two things. One, I absolutely regret the appearance of some of those texts and wish I would have said or phrased or not said at all some of the things I did. Two, I disagree completely with your attribution to my views of Trump supporters. I never said that. I expressed no such thing. There are millions and millions and millions of Americans who I deeply respect and honor who voted for Mr. Trump.
Here.
But I just
also,
want to correct a
interestingly, you told Ms. Page, and I'll quote here, "I loathe Congress," and she agreed. Now, you're probably in pretty good company there. A survey I saw a while back about Congress found us less popular than root canals and head lice and colonoscopies. And although we did beat out playground bullies and the Ebola virus, but this is not about us. It's about you and whether or not the American people can have the confidence in the investigations that you were involved in and whether you were fair and unbiased when you investigated both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Would you agree with that?
Sir, I appreciate that concern very much, and let me explain a little bit about that comment. I have the utmost respect for Congress, for its role in oversight, for its role in passing laws, for any of the functions. What I was stating in that comment was the efforts by some to turn legitimate oversight activity into unwarranted
we appreciate
criticism of the FBI for the FBI doing nothing but doing its job.
There's a lot of us up here that don't like Congress particularly, too. So I would, there's probably a lot of the American people, the vast majority would agree with you on that. Mr. Strzok, you were removed from the Mueller investigation, correct?
Yes.
But for the most part, all the others that were there are still there, correct?
I can't speak to the current staffing and personnel of the special counsel. Let me tell you who
they are. Greg Andrus, who gave $1,000 to the Democrat running to hold the Senate seat previously held by Barack Obama, and $2,600 to Democrat Senator Gillibrand, and $0 to the Trump campaign. He's still there. And Rush Atkinson, who donated to the Clinton campaign, and $0 to the Trump campaign. He's still there. And Kayleigh Freeney, who contributed to both the Obama presidential campaigns and the Hillary Clinton's campaign, and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And Andrew Goldstein, who donated $3,300 to both Obama campaigns and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And Elizabeth Prelogar, who, by the way, clerked for liberal Supreme Court Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan and contributed to both the Obama and Clinton campaigns and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And James Quarles, who contributed to the Democratic presidential campaigns of Dukakis and Gore and Kerry and Obama and Hillary Clinton. Now, he did contribute to former Congressman Chaffetz and Allen, but he contributed $20,000 to the Democratic and Senate campaign committees and $0 to the Trump campaigns. I could go on, but I'm just about to run out of time. Suffice it to say that 9 of the 16 investigators still on the case gave to Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or to both, and none gave to Trump. Now, shouldn't such a wide disparity in political support of one party over the other give the American people concern that even though you are off the Mueller team, that the fairness and lack of bias that President Trump deserves and the American people deserve just might be lacking here?
The gentleman's out of time, but the witness may answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, what I'd tell you is this, and what I'd ask you to tell your constituents is this. I have and had no idea what contributions were made by anybody staffing the special counsel's office. What I can tell you and what I'd ask you to relay to your constituents is the men and women that I saw, the attorneys, the agents, the analysts, were the most remarkable, bright, patriotic, hardworking people that I've ever had the honor of working with. I want you to know, and whether people leave here believing me or not, I was absolutely and remained absolutely convinced that the efforts and the personnel who make up the office of the special counsel are the best in America. And I have complete faith and confidence that they will arrive at the truth and that they will do that well.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Strzok, I don't know where to start. If I could give you a Purple Heart, I would. You deserve one. This has been an attack on you in a way to attack Mr. Mueller and the investigation that is to get at Russia collusion involved in our election, which is what this committee should be looking at. A direct strike at democracy and what this country's about, and free and fair elections, keeping us independent of who is our foe, not our competitor, our foe. I just returned from the OSCE in Berlin, and there is little question among our allies and people and diplomats throughout Europe that Russia is an antagonistic country that is trying to wreak havoc in the Baltics, in the Balkans as well. They tried to use assassination to try to influence the elections in Montenegro, what they've done in Ukraine with Crimea and the Donbass, what they've done in Georgia, what they've done in Moldova. They are the bad guys. And you've dedicated most of your life to working in counterintelligence. One of your big cases, I think, was Donald Heathfield and Tracy Ann Foley. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was, how many Russian folks did you expose and bring to justice?
Well, that was a long, large investigation that a tremendous number of extraordinary people worked on. There were ultimately, I believe, 10, roughly, Russian illegals that were here, but that I started out in the early days and was honored to start out, and again, that ran a decade.
And how many Russians were deported for that?
Sir, if memory serves, 10 or 11, but I'm not certain on that number.
Pretty good case that you worked on, a good job.
Case.
Did you work on Russia primarily when you were at the FBI in that area?
At that period, early on, yes.
Are there some things you can tell us about the Russians that maybe we should know before the president meets with Mr. Putin, his very good friend, and a man he cannot say anything bad about?
Well, sir, I can speak to my experience as a national security professional in the FBI. The Russians are a top-rate adversary in terms of their foreign intelligence service, in terms of how competently they are able to use their intelligence service to achieve their foreign policy and national security goals, many of which you referenced, their desire, the threat from NATO, trying to undermine the Western alliance, trying to minimize the role and influence and leadership of the United States around the world, attempting to minimize and undermine the extraordinary greatness of our democracy, to make it seem pedestrian and nothing special and on par with their kleptocracy and near dictatorship that they have, to somehow make us seem less. But that's my intelligence perspective. I wouldn't presume to get into a foreign policy.
They engage occasionally in assassination
They do.
Political rivals?
Yes.
An arrest of journalists for maybe talking and writing about things that the state doesn't believe in?
Yes.
It's not America.
Not at all.
Well, that's unfortunately what the Mueller investigation is looking into, is Russian collusion to influence our election and to influence our politics. And you have dedicated your life to working against that type of involvement and against that type of effort to subvert our democracy and to undermine it. I thank you for that. It's astonishing to me that you would be put on trial as you have today. The beginning of this discussion, this committee meeting, somebody said, we don't want young people to look at the front pages constantly and see things about the FBI that's putting the FBI and the Justice Department in questions and on the front page. Well, I would submit to this committee that the people who are putting that on the front page is this committee, and the people who won't accept what the investigator general said, that there was no bias involved in the actions of you or others that were investigated. There was found no evidence that the conclusions by the prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. With that as a fact, there's no reason for this hearing. No reason at all. But it puts it on the front page again and again and again. And as you said earlier, the Russians are loving it because this is what they want. This is what they want. You'd think it was Benghazi. It was a never-ending television show from Congress that got nowhere except tried to influence the people that watch Fox News. And that's what this is about. And this is really unfortunate. And as they say, you could put lipstick on a pig, but this is nothing but a ruse to try to get to the Mueller investigation and make people think it's baseless, that it's biased, that it's 13 Democrats that are working on this, and they're prejudiced and they're discriminatory and they're biased because they, just as Jack Nicholson said in the movie, A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. And the truth is, this is the most corrupt administration ever, and it's going to be exposed by Robert Mueller. Thank God. I yield back, and I thank you.
The gentleman from Tennessee yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. Agent Strzok, did you provide any information to reporters, journalists, or media personalities about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 17, or 18?
No.
Did the press ever talk to you, Agent Strzok, about this issue? Did they ever come to you?
The Trump-Russia collusion investigation?
Did the press ever come to you? I'm asking first, did you talk to them? I'm asking now, did they ever come to you about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 2017, or 2018?
I received a number of calls from various members of the media, particularly when I returned from the Office of Special Counsel. In every instance,
Prior to going on the special counsel team, did you get any inquiries from the press that you took?
Not that I took. I referred them to the Office of Public Affairs of the FBI.
Have you read the dossier?
I have.
Okay, and you wrote about it too, didn't you?
I don't know what you mean by writing about it.
We got an email that you sent. It should be presented there, or should be in front of you there. I want you to take a look at this. This is an email you wrote to Lisa Page, Bill Priestap, Jim Baker, Jim Rubicki, and CC'd Andy McCabe. Subject line is BuzzFeed's about to publish the dossier. You familiar with this email?
I am.
All right. Says this: comparing now, the set is only identical to what McCain had. Parentheses, it has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Did you write all that?
Congressman, let me answer it this way. The first, if I could address the chairman. Over the break, I was authorized by the General Counsel.
Hang on a second. I just want my time stopped if you could. Are you addressing me or the chairman?
I'd like to address the chairman because this is all going to come together in an answer.
Is there a question you want to direct?
No, it's something I wanted to answer your question from earlier based on something I've been told by the FBI.
Wait.
I think I'm aware of what the FBI told you, and I will have another chance to talk about that. But right now, the gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
Right.
You wrote this. That was the question.
So obviously,
wait. Look at that. Do you see the from?
So Congressman, here's
do you see the from line? Do you see the from line?
Congressman, I do.
It says
and I
Peter
understand
Strzok. And then it says to Lisa Page and a whole bunch of other key people at the FBI. So did you write it?
I did write this.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions about it. It has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Who's Korn?
Sir, to answer that question, and I would love to answer that question, and every part of me, and you know why I'd want to answer that question because you have this information.
Who's Simpson?
I have been, sir, if I may, I cannot answer that question.
You wrote about it. It's now public. Who's Korn? Who's Simpson?
Based on direction by the FBI, sir, I am not able to answer questions about ongoing investigative matters.
I just want to figure this out. Agent Strzok. You're referencing 3 copies of the dossier. The BuzzFeed copy you have, the one John McCain's staff gave to you, and the one that you said you got from Korn and Simpson. The one McCain gave to you and the one BuzzFeed has are identical in your words, but they have the Korn and Simpson one is different.
Sir,
this is kind of important.
It is important, and I want to answer your question. And here's the position that I'm in, Congressman. I have been directed. May I answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jordan repeatedly asks a question, doesn't let him answer it.
The gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
I have been directed that I may state that I have read the dossier, that I read the dossier as it came in parts and pieces.
You've already told me you read it.
And
I want to know who Korn and Simpson are.
And, sir, what I'm telling you is that I have been directed I may not state the various places where the FBI
let me ask you this. I got it. I know what you're saying. Did you ever communicate with David Korn?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Glenn Simpson?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Nellie Orr?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Bruce Orr?
Yes.
When did you communicate with Bruce Orr?
My recollection is somewhere between possibly 3 or 4 or 5 times in the late 2016, early 2017 timeframe.
What did you talk about?
We talked about investigative matters that Mr. Orr was involved in.
Did you talk about the investigation we're focused on here, Agent Strzok?
My direction from the FBI is that I may not answer that question, sir.
I got it. Let's go back to the email that you sent that you won't talk about. Are there 3 copies of the dossier as evidenced by what you said in this email?
Sir, to be clear, I want to talk about this email. I want nothing more than
all
answer your
you
question
want, but you're
because it
not
would leave
talking
you
about it. You're
sadly
not answering my
disappointed.
questions. Are there 3 copies?
3 copies of what?
The McCain copy, the BuzzFeed copy, and the one that you got from Corn and Simpson.
Sir, the most I can say is we received a variety of copies of and different types of
Let me ask you one other question. Let me ask you one other question. Glenn Simpson testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on August 22nd, 2017. He was asked, did anyone from Fusion ever communicate with the FBI? His response, no. No one from Fusion ever spoke with the FBI. So here's what I'm having trouble understanding. If Glenn Simpson says no one ever spoke with the FBI, how is it that you got a copy of the dossier from Simpson?
Sir, I can tell you I never had contact with Fusion, with Mr. Simpson, with Mr. Corn. And again, sir.
Chairman, regular order.
The gentleman will have a few more seconds since he was interrupted.
Well, I mean, this is the frustration that every single member of this committee feels is when Agent Strzok won't answer, well, more importantly, the American people feel when Agent Strzok won't answer fundamental questions like the guy he references in an email, Corn and Simpson, and won't tell me who they are. This is unbelievable. But that's where it's gotten to now, and it's as frustrating as it can get, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, it is as frustrating to me as it is to you. I can tell you, sir, that I would love.
You know what, Agent Strzok?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted to answer.
If it's so,
Gentlemen will suspend.
If it's so frustrating, answer the question.
If you'll allow him to, I'm sure he will.
He has never answered the question who
Stop
Corn and Simpson
interrupting
are.
him.
We're about
The gentleman instruct the gentleman from Ohio to stop badgering and allow him to answer the question.
We're about to move on. The gentleman from Ohio's time's expired. And we're about to move on where Mr. Strzok can answer a question that he refused to answer earlier on advice of counsel. And I'm going to yield to Mr. Gowdy for the purpose of doing that right now.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Gowdy starts, may I respond to Mr. Jordan?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, sir. I would love to do that. There is an appropriate time for oversight, and as you well know, that is at the end of an investigation once it's concluded. I am certain Congress will absolutely have the opportunity to look at any investigation once it's closed, ask all these questions, and I would love to answer each and every one of your questions
Mr.
once
Strzok,
the FBI allows me in the
we already
investigation.
know that answer from you, and you have already been advised that you can answer the questions here, because guess what? This is the United States Congress where you're testifying, not under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mr. Chairman, we cannot be asking about an ongoing investigation that is sabotaging an ongoing investigation by this committee, and that's what he's not cooperating with, and we should not do it.
It is
and he cannot cooperating with that.
These questions are table-setting questions regarding the formation of this, and he can answer those questions, but
he cannot answer questions regarding an ongoing investigation.
That he can, and so Mr.
He's
Gowdy's
been advised by the FBI that he cannot.
No, he's been advised that he can, and Mr. Gowdy's going to again ask his question.
The gentleman from Ohio has asked for 15 seconds.
So, Agent Strzok, who's being square here? Glenn Simpson says no one from Fusion spoke with the FBI. You say in your email, we got a copy of the dossier from Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, regular order.
We will have regular order, and we'll revisit that question. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August
Mr. Chairman,
6th.
regular order.
This is regular order. The gentleman refused to answer the question earlier. He has now been advised, and I have been advised by the FBI that he may answer the question that was in order earlier, and he's now going to answer the question.
But, Mr. Chairman, Republicans have controlled the time. Now the time goes to the Democrats.
The gentleman will be recognized shortly.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August 6th, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
I don't recall, and I'd have to check the case file.
We waited all that time for that answer?
Yes, sir.
That's eerily similar to what you said a couple hours ago.
Sir, I am telling you, and I would reject the characterization that I refuse to answer anything. I want to answer these questions.
Well,
I'm going by the direction that I received from the FBI.
I just asked you one, and I'm looking for a number.
Sir, and my answer
I'm looking
is
for a number.
I do not know without the opportunity to check the case file.
You don't recall in the first week of an investigation that you originated, approved, or the contact person on, you don't recall how many witness interviews you did in the first week.
Sir, I remember that there were interviews conducted. I do not know when they fell on a calendar to be able to tell you whether they were
When's the
in
last
any
time
set
you
of
looked
date
at-
or the other on something that was occurring in the context of a myriad other responsibilities.
When's the last time you looked at the file, Agent Strzok?
Probably going on a year.
For those of us who happened to look at it yesterday, would you disagree that the first interview took place on August the 11th?
I don't know, Congressman. I cannot answer that.
Well, prior to July 31st, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
None.
So none before July 31st, which would be none at the time you said what you said in that text on July 21st.
I don't understand the text you're referring to.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This is on our time.
Well, no, there are two more questions he didn't.
All right.
He wouldn't
The
answer.
gentleman will continue.
Between May
Explain
17th.
why he can continue in our time.
He can continue. He's not on your time.
Not
It's
my
on-
personally,
it's on-
Democratic
It's
time.
on our time because he was advised earlier by the FBI that he could not answer the questions, and now he's advised that he can. So the questions will be asked and answered.
Between May 17th.
Parliamentary inquiry, what rules are we following that would dictate such an answer by you, Mr. Chairman?
We are following the rules of the committee.
Could you cite the rule?
No.
No.
Gentlemen will proceed.
Just, Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary
Excuse me,
inquiry.
this seems to be well.
We're going to, the Democrats.
Mr. Chairman, point of
obstruction this
parliamentary
hearing
inquiry.
Can continue, but when you do, and the FBI tells him he can't answer a question, and then they change their mind and says he can, we're going to take the time out to do that, and then we're going to continue.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman from
Democratic
South
members of this
Carolina
committee have a
is
right to
recognized.
know what the rules are in governing this hearing.
Agent-
Gentlemen,
Can you share with us
the
these
gentleman
secret rules
is not
that
in
you're
order.
making up as you go along?
Agent Strzok, between May 17th, 2017 and May 18th, 2017, how many interviews did you conduct as part of the special counsel team?
I don't believe I conducted any.
Between May 17th, 2017 and May 22nd, 2017, how many witness interviews did you conduct in that 5-day period?
Well, so you just went back a year from 2018 to 2017, and I don't know.
2017, May 17th, 2017,
Okay.
May 22nd, 2017.
Yeah, I believe you may have said 18, but 17, I don't know.
Whether I did or not, it's the 17th, 2017.
Fair enough, and I don't recall.
Well, Chairman, I appreciate you letting me make that clear. And again, the context when you would not answer it was you used the word impeachment on May the 18th, 2017, and you used the word impeachment on May the 22nd, 2017. And your testimony is you can't recall a single interview you would have done as part of that investigation that was supposed to lead to impeachment. And I think that line of questioning, I'm glad the FBI finally realized it, albeit a couple hours too late. When you are prejudging not just a result, but a punishment, which is what impeachment is. When you are prejudging the conviction and the sentencing, when you have not conducted a single solitary interview, I'm sorry, Agent Strzok, but that is letting your bias impact your professional judgment.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, so look, I never prejudged anything. Not in this case, not in any others.
Impeachment
Second,
for what,
Mr.
Agent Strzok? Impeachment for what?
Second of
After
all,
Mr.
Chairman, what are the rules here? Mr. Chairman, what are the rules?
The gentleman will
He's
allow
opened
the
up a whole
witness
new
to
round of
answer the question, and then we'll move on.
second,
He was given time to respond. And
the
now he's
notion, at the time I was the deputy assistant director, I have section chiefs, unit chiefs in the field, supervisors, agents, people who typically do interviews, not me. If something is notable or high level, I might be involved, but it would be rare, if never, that I would typically get out there and conduct interviews, first of all. Second, You mentioned the use of the word impeachment. That was used in the context of my not knowing what this would lead to. I was not prejudging impeachment. When I used that term, it was saying
Agent
it might
Strzok,
do nothing.
please.
It might lead all the way to something on the other.
Thank you, Agent Strzok.
Agent
The
Strzok,
chair
are you
now
kidding?
recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you,
5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman. And Special Agent Strzok, I just continue to be amazed that my colleagues in the majority are more interested in your text messages than they are about the leader of the free world doing everything possible to undermine the Western alliance. It just amazes me, Special Agent Strzok, as a counterintelligence specialist, you know all too well the pervasive, constant, and growing danger that the Russian Federation poses to this country, our allies, and to democracy in general. It is appalling that my colleagues in the majority continue to relitigate the 2016 election while the president does more damage in to the Western alliance than the sum total of all previous Russian and Soviet leaders could have dreamed of. And it is remarkable that Mr. Trump accused our trusted ally Germany of being, and I quote, totally under the control of Russia. I would say that the president is half right. Someone is totally under control of Russia, but it's not Germany. You know, the president should look in the mirror and explain why virtually every decision he makes and every word he utters weakens our key friends, erodes our strategic alliances, and strengthens our most dangerous adversary. Mr. Strzok, can you offer an explanation as to why the president is so eager to punish our allies and please Vladimir Putin?
Sir, I wouldn't presume to do that, no.
All right, let me move on to the meeting of June the 9th, 2016 in Trump Tower. We have a series of emails in front of us, one from Rob Goldstein, who told Donald Trump Jr. that the Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with Aras Agalarov this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia.
We want to break away from this hearing for just a moment. We want to take you to England, where President Trump and the First Lady have just arrived for a black-tie gala. It's in Blenheim Palace, which is near Oxford, and it's where Winston Churchill was in fact born. The current Prime Minister, though, Theresa May, is hosting the event. The President and First Lady are being greeted by royal guards and bands. There's been a great deal of security just throughout London in general, also protests against Mr. Trump's trip. The dinner is being held at this particular palace because it's actually the only palace in Britain that's not owned by the monarchy or the church. You can actually visit it if you're in town. Well, for now, we want to take you back to Capitol Hill to the Peter Strzok hearing. We'll have much more on the president's visit to the United Kingdom.
Again, not relating it to any particular event. I think the hypothetical would be enormously concerning because a hostile foreign power, one, by definition of that hostility is their national interests are adverse to ours. The fact that people would be meeting or attempting to work together implicates a variety of potential criminal violations. I think it would give concern about the motivations and the actions of the people involved and whether or not whose interest, whether America's or that hostile foreign powers they were truly working towards.
And when campaigns are given defensive counterintelligence briefings, are they generally instructed to report foreign interference attempts to the FBI?
That is typically part of a CI defensive briefing, yes.
I want to thank you so much for your responses and your patience. And you know, today's hearing is a sorry display on the part of my Republican colleagues who have put the defense of the president over the ultimate responsibility we in Congress have to protect our national security. All of you should be ashamed of yourself. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To start this off, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from South Carolina for a brief presentation.
Thank the gentleman from Iowa. Agent Strzok, do you have your text in front of you?
I do not.
Can you, well, let me read one to you, and you tell me whether or not you recall saying this. On May the 18th, 2017, who gives a, I'll give you a hint, starts with F, one more AD versus an investigation leading to, guess what that last word is?
Sorry, I recall the text. It's impeachment.
Impeachment. The day after Mueller was appointed. How about on May the 22nd? Do you remember that text? Do you have that one in front of you?
I do not.
Well, here, let me see if this refreshes your recollection. This is you in response to something Lisa Page sent you. I'm torn. I think, no, I'm more replaceable than you are in this. I'm the best for it, but there are others who can do it. Okay, you're different and more unique. This is yours, plus leaving an SC, having been an SC, resulting in an, guess what that next word is?
I'm sure you've got it, sir.
No, well, you wrote it.
Are you asking me what it's?
Yeah, what is? What do you think it is?
I don't need to guess. Impeachment, sir.
Impeachment. 5 days. 5 days after Mueller has been appointed special counsel, and you're already talking about impeachment twice. I thank the gentleman from Iowa.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond, please?
The gentleman
At the conclusion of Mr. King's time, you may
Struck him over here now to your left, and I wanted to point out that you repeatedly stated here before this committee that you separated out your personal beliefs from any action that you took. You'd agree with that, I'm confident. And as implausible as that sounds to us, we've listened to a dogmatic defense of the implausible argument that no matter how biased you were, no matter how profane in that bias you were, it didn't affect your judgment or your decisions. Now, that's a tough argument to make, but I recall your response to Mr. Duncan of Tennessee on that topic, and you said, I don't agree with the characterization of my views as biased. Do you hold with that position that your views are not biased, whether or not they colored your activities as an agent?
I believe they did not color them, and I believe they are not biased.
The derogatory texts that you delivered that have been before this committee for the better part of this day don't reflect a bias.
They don't, sir. And why? Because not a single representative of the IG has been able to demonstrate a single act, not one indicating bias. Not one.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Strzok. It's one thing to say that you found a way to wall off your bias, but it's not possible to take under oath and tell the American people in this committee that there's not bias. If there's never ever, the evidence of this bias is replete throughout this evidence, throughout these documents that we have. Let me take you another place. Were you involved in the questioning of Hillary Clinton on July 2nd, 2016?
Yes, I was. I'm pausing because I think it was second or third, but if you represent it's the second, it's the second.
The second is the date that I believe we worked with. But in any case, in that room, how many agents were in that room?
3, including myself.
And were there any other representatives of the executive branch of government?
There were.
And who were they?
5 attorneys from the Department of Justice.
5?
Yes, sir.
5 attorneys from the Department of Justice and 4 then from the FBI?
No, sir.
Including yourself?
No, sir. A total of 8 people.
3 FBI, 5 DOJ. And then the people in the room with Hillary Clinton were Carol Mills,
Secretary
Heather Samuelson.
Clinton, 1, 2, 3, I believe 4 other attorneys, 4 or 5.
I see. And did you record any of that interview? And can you tell me how long that took?
We did not record it. My recollection is that it took several hours. I don't recall the exact time.
And then what documents would you have that memorialize the interview?
An FD 302 is created based on the notes taken by the participants in the interview.
And how many of those 8 agents or officers had their notes, that took notes in that room?
I don't know. I know the 2 I did. I believe some, and I know the two agents did. I don't recall about the DOJ attorneys.
I want to ask you to reconstruct, who were those agents?
There were two of the case agents assigned to the Clinton investigation.
And what are their names?
Sir, FBI policy,
I
I've been
expected
directed,
that
I
answer.
can't answer.
But I want to let you know, we must know who was in that room. And we must have access to those notes, because that's what they used to compile the 302 report. Did you brief Director Comey on that 302 report?
Well, two things. Going back to the 302, it is relying on notes, but it's also drafted based on the memories of the agents participating in it.
Notes and memory.
Notes are not complete. But yes, my recollection is I did brief Director Comey on the results of that interview.
And we will be asking for the specifics on that data that you are knowledgeable of. And I'd ask the chairman if you would be willing to issue a subpoena for the texts that Mr. Strzok testifies as are not work-related. I believe there's a very good chance they are work-related. And the balance of this for the information on who was in the room on that date when Hillary Clinton was interviewed, which officers from the FBI, which officers from the DOJ, and let's call them to this Congress and get their testimony on what took place inside that room, Mr. Chairman.
We will take your request under advisement. The time of the gentleman has expired. I told Mr. Strzok he could briefly respond to Mr. Gowdy's.
Sir, yes, thank you. And if I may, just briefly to Mr. King, sir, right? First, I am asserting to you that my personal belief did not constitute bias. Every American has political belief, every single one, and I would submit to you that the vast, vast majority of those people are not biased individuals. So that is a comment I'd like to make to you.
By your testimony, I'm free from that allegation for myself for life, Mr. Strzok.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to you. My mentions of the word impeachment, if you look at the selective text that you've chosen and you expand that look to others, you will see that in no way did I prejudge that outcome. In fact, what you've conspicuously omitted, is a statement I made expressing concern that I'm not sure there's a big there. What that clearly demonstrates, sir, is I had prejudged nothing. What it clearly demonstrates was I was looking at one potential outcome being impeachment. I was simultaneously looking at the polar opposite outcome, that there might be nothing, that there might be no criminal activity whatsoever. And I think it's fair that you take texts in the totality of the context in which they're made.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were or you are a special agent for the FBI. How long?
Going on 22 years, sir.
And you
Actually,
pretty much spent your
just over 20, sir.
You pretty much spent your professional career at the FBI. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the Republicans on this committee seem to be obsessed with your text messages, but during your long career with the FBI, you've accomplished quite a bit more than simply leaving a text message trail. Is that correct?
I've had the privilege of working on an extraordinary number of very great cases.
Well, you rose through the ranks of the FBI to, at one point, become chief of the counter-espionage section at the FBI. Is that correct?
Yes.
And your career at the FBI culminated with your appointment as the Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division. Is that correct?
Well, I certainly held that. I would tell you I'm extraordinarily proud to have worked as a DAD in the Human Resources Division as well.
And during your career in counterespionage at the FBI, did you lead a counterintelligence operation that was called Operation Ghost Stories?
I did not lead it. I was one of the many agents who started that investigation and a pair of the subjects early on that I was one of the case agents on.
You worked on it throughout the course of that 10-year investigation?
No, just at the beginning, several years, sir.
I see. But you worked on many other counterintelligence investigations during your career at the FBI?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, Operation Ghost Stories was a multi-year counterintelligence investigation of a network of United States-based Russian spies working as covert agents of Russian intelligence, the agency known as SVR. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And the target of that investigation was a group of covert SVR agents who had assumed false identities and were living in the United States on long-term deep cover assignments, correct?
That's correct.
You've investigated a number of those kinds of counter or intelligence. You've presided over a number of those types of investigations during your time with the FBI. Is that correct?
I have, yes.
And these Russian agents have infiltrated America, set up to be undercover and then develop sources that they can use then to develop information and then funnel that information back to Russia. Isn't that correct?
Yes, to develop that information from the United States and other denied areas from within our government.
And as soon as you find one cell, if you will, of Russian spies, take them down, there are also other cells working throughout America. Isn't that correct?
That's generally correct.
And it was your job to keep on top of that kind of activity.
Yes.
You led a team of FBI agents who did nothing other than counterintelligence investigations for the FBI. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were successful in arresting and prosecuting numerous individuals for espionage and other crimes against the United States of America. Isn't that correct?
Me as part of a large number of very competent, talented folks, yes.
And, sir, you've gained a great deal of intelligence about Russian spying activities, their methods and sources as they operate in the United States and in other allied nations. Isn't that correct?
Certainly true within the United States and to a lesser extent overseas.
And you've used your skills to keep America safe.
I have, sir. It's my proud duty to have done so.
There's a lot more to your career than a few emails, isn't that correct? And text messages.
Absolutely, sir.
So to boil it down to that is really a disservice to you. I think as opposed to the Republicans here being so desperate to find a way to discredit the Mueller investigation by discrediting you as a person, I think rather than they doing that, we should be honoring you for the work that you have done over the last 22 years to keep this nation safe. And this hearing is a reckless abuse and misuse of congressional authority. I'm looking forward to Republicans finishing the hell up with this damn Peter Strzok text message investigation. And with that, I'll yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, for 5 minutes.
That would be right here. Mr. Strzok, you said earlier in this hearing you were concerned about a hostile foreign power affecting our election. Do you recall the Intelligence Community Inspector General, Chuck McCulloch, having an investigation into an anomaly found on Hillary Clinton's emails?
I do not.
Well, let me refresh your recollection. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, Chuck McCulloch, sent his investigator, Frank Rucker, along with an IG attorney, Jeanette McMillan, to brief you and Dean Chappelle and 2 other FBI personnel that I won't name at this time about an anomaly they had found on Hillary Clinton's emails that were going to and from the private unauthorized server that you were supposed to be investigating. Now, do you remember it?
I remember meeting Mr. Rucker on either 1 or 2 occasions. I do not remember the specific content or discussions.
Well, I'll help you with that too then. Mr. Rucker reported to those of you, the 4 of you there, in the presence of the IG attorney, that they had found this anomaly on Hillary Clinton's emails going through her private server. And when they had done the forensic analysis, they found that her emails, every single one except for 4, over 30,000 of them, were going to an address that was not on the distribution list. It was a compartmentalized bit of information that was sending it to an unauthorized source. Do you recall that?
Sir, I don't.
Well,
But
he went on to explain it, and you didn't say anything.
No.
You thanked him, you shook his hand, but the problem was that it was going to an unauthorized source that was a foreign entity unrelated to Russia, and from what you've said here, you did nothing more than nod and shake the man's hand when you didn't seem to be all that concerned about our national integrity of our election when it was involving Hillary Clinton. So the forensic examination was done by the ICIG, and they can document that, but you were given that information and you did nothing with it. And one of the things I found most egregious with Mr. Horowitz's testimony, and by the way, Horowitz got a call 4 times by someone wanting to brief him, leaving messages telling him about this, and he never returned the call. He had 500 pages of bias that he gave us, and then he threw a bone to the Democrats and said, but we can't find bias. And let me tell you, when you have text messages, Mr. Strzok, the way you do, saying the things you did, you'd been better off coming in here and say, look, that was my bias. And you kind of get around to that a little bit when you say, hey, everybody's got political views. Those are called biases, and we all have them. And you have come in here and said, I had no bias. And you do it with a straight face. And I watched you in the private testimony you gave. And I told some of the other guys, he is really good. He's lying. He knows, we know he's lying. And he could probably pass a polygraph.
Point.
It's amazing.
Mr. Chairman.
No, this is my
Mr.
time.
Chairman, I'm sorry.
And it needs to
Point
be
of order.
paused.
This point of order.
No,
The gentleman will state his point of order.
A member of this committee just asserted that this witness, who is under oath and a former agent of the FBI, lied. There is no evidence that. I ask him to withdraw it.
I do not withdraw it. He is not a member of Congress. It's not a violation of the rule. And just as you have been expressing bias through your members about what a hero
There is not a single person on this committee who has ever characterized a witness
Gentleman
as
from
lying.
Rhode Island,
Sitting here
gentleman,
hearing
it's
before
my
this committee.
time.
That's a disgrace.
Gentleman from Rhode Island will
praise
suspend.
him. No, the disgrace
Mr.
is what this man has done.
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
Credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on you,
always
Mr.
an
Chairman.
issue.
Mr. Chairman, please, there's
Have you Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
The gentleman controls the time.
I ask that the witness be permitted to respond
He
to
will be permitted. He will be permitted
Did
to
you
respond.
ever
The
talk
gentleman
to
controls
Hillary
the time.
Clinton during your investigation, besides the one questioning you mentioned, before that or after that to this day?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
It is, I think, against the rules of the House for a member of the committee to be impugning the character of a witness.
It is not.
He should ask questions to elicit. The purpose of this hearing is to elicit information. He should ask questions to elicit information. He should not be impugning the character of the witness.
The gentleman is advised the rules of the House only are directed to members of the House and the President of the United States.
Therefore, in other words, it is okay to impugn the character of witnesses in any way whatsoever?
Well, listen, I've heard many members on your side of the aisle impugn character of somebody who is covered by the rules of the House. But the gentleman, the gentleman has 20 seconds left. The clock will be turned back on, and he can complete his time, and then the witness can respond.
So if you talk to Hillary Clinton, other than the time she was examined in front of the witnesses?
No.
So after throwing away what you have with all the bias you have. You've never even gotten a thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman may respond.
Sir, well, that's quite a set of statements.
Mr. Chairman, I did not finish with a question.
The gentleman,
there was no question asked.
Mr.
Chairman, he's been given the opportunity to respond.
the gentleman will suspend. The time of the gentleman has expired, and as I've indicated
The rules
earlier,
of our hearings are if there is a question asked during the time, the witness may respond to the question after the time.
The witness is going to be allowed to respond briefly.
That's a new rule.
Sir, first, I assure you,
question.
under oath, as I spoke also during my interview a week or two ago, I have always told the truth. The fact that you would accuse me otherwise, the fact that you would question whether or not that was the sort of look I would engage with in a family member who I have acknowledged hurting, goes more to a discussion about your character and what you stand for and what is going inside you.
It's
and the
to
integrity
your
of men.
credibility, and you lost your credibility.
Both individuals.
You've lost your credibility.
While
That's
I doubt
the
it
problem.
plays well
Gentleman
to
from
America,
Texas will,
I'm not sure it plays
the
well.
gentleman from Texas will suspend. The witness has had ample opportunity to express his feelings about that, and now the chair recognizes the
Mr. Chairman, there is a discussion about the representative's first assertion about what the ICIG said that I would like to respond to.
Very briefly.
Very briefly. I have no recollection of that conversation. I can tell you I am not a computer forensic expert. I can tell you that every allegation that we had, and ICIG was a great and close partner, every allegation that we had, whether from them or anybody else, was forwarded to experts who looked at it. The scores and scores of servers and BlackBerries and emails and everything we got were combed over carefully by the FBI's experts to see if there's any indicia of intrusion.
But you don't recall going over those emails, correct?
Gentlemen will suspend.
I have no idea what you're talking about, and frankly,
and the witness will suspend as well.
I do not know what you're talking about.
That is
just
enough.
Can't let a witness go on forever when the fact is you never did
Mr.
anything
Chairman,
about those.
order.
Correct?
Regular order.
It's wrong. Your members are all out of order. We're going judiciary over. Judiciary member
You didn't do anything about it.
Sir, if there was a lead, I gave it to the team, unequivocally.
The gentleman,
there was nothing along the lines that was not addressed.
Well, that'll come out.
Mr. Gomer, you will suspend. Mr. Deutsch, I apologize. I've been instructed by the ranking member that we're going committee to committee, so the next gentleman who's going to be recognized is the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Wow. The American public might be forgiven for mistaking this so-called hearing for a Russian political show trial. It's got all the trappings: character assassination, demagoguery, connecting dots that aren't meant to be connected, generalizing from an isolated incident, cherry-picking facts, sometimes fabricating facts. It's astounding. It's a new low in the United States Congress. What a shame. But Mr. Strozk, you're under oath. And my understanding is the big Republican beef, in order to discredit you and discredit the FBI and thereby, hopefully, from their point of view, undermine the Mueller investigation, hinges on the fact that you sent out some indiscreet personal emails about your political views on the then pending 2016 election. Is that correct?
Sir, that's my understanding.
All right. So you're under oath. I want you to say yes or no. The following email: character matters. Real Donald Trump is obviously not going to win, but he can still make an honorable move, step aside, and let someone else try. Did you write that email?
I don't believe I did.
No, you didn't. Republican Senator Ben Sasse wrote that email. Another unforgivable sin. He should be here as well, apparently. My wife, Julia, and I, we have a 15-year-old daughter. Do you think I can look her in the eye and tell her that I endorse Donald Trump? When he acts like this, and his apology, that was no apology. That was an apology for getting caught. I can't tell the good people of my state that I endorsed a person who acts like this. Was that you, Mr. Strozk?
No, sir.
No, it wasn't. It was Republican Jason Chaffetz, former chairman of my committee. Did you write the following? For the good of the country and to give the Republicans a chance of defeating Hillary Clinton, Mr. Trump should step aside. His defeat at this point seems almost certain. And 4 years of Hillary Clinton is not what's best for this country. Mr. Trump should put the country first and do the right thing. That's you, certainly, right?
No, sir.
No, you're right. It was Republican member of Congress Mike Coffman from Colorado. In light of these comments, Donald Trump should step aside and allow our party to replace him with Mike Pence or another appropriate nominee. I cannot in good conscience vote for Donald Trump, and I would never vote for Hillary Clinton. That's yours.
No, sir.
No, that's Republican Barbara Comstock of our home state of Virginia. All right, well, here's another one. It's now clear Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States and cannot defeat Hillary Clinton. I believe he should step aside and allow Governor Pence to lead the Republican ticket. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
You didn't? No, you're right. That's Republican Bradley Byrne of Alabama. Well, how about this one? Donald Trump's behavior makes him unacceptable as a candidate for president, and I won't vote for him. As disappointed as I've been with his antics throughout this campaign, I thought supporting the nominee was the best thing for our country and our party. Now it's abundantly clear that the best thing for our country and our party is for Trump to step aside and allow responsible, respectable Republicans to lead the ticket. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
Oh, no. That was Republican Martha Roby of Alabama. Well, how about this one? I respectfully ask that you, Mr. Trump, with all due respect, step aside. Step down. Allow someone else to carry the banner of principles. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
No, you're right again. That was Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. So it sounds like when you were writing these emails in the heat of the campaign, you had a lot of good company on the Republican side of the aisle. And now you're an orphan. I wonder what changed. But your opinion was hardly a striking one, hardly unusual, especially where you and I live, Northern Virginia. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So your sin of writing an email criticizing the candidate Trump and predicting he would lose was not an isolated kind of opinion. Is that correct?
No, it was not, to my knowledge.
And do you, under oath, confirm what the Inspector General, Mr. Horowitz, said? There's no evidence, your personal opinion notwithstanding, that in any way it tainted the ongoing criminal investigation led by Mr. Mueller.
I do.
That's your testimony, under oath.
Yes.
I thank you. And I'm so sorry for the treatment you've received here today. As a member of Congress, as a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I take no pleasure in watching this spectacle. Thank you, Mr. Strozk, for being here.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I take no pleasure in the self-pity that you have shown the rest of us the entire day. I'm a former prosecutor. I loved being a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, and I spent 22 years on the criminal bench trying criminal cases, saw about 25,000 felony cases. And I saw a lot of people in law enforcement. But in our entire justice system, from the beginning to the end of the justice system, people are involved in our justice system. And those people, whoever they are, cannot be biased one way or the other. And it starts in a courtroom with the jury. Both lawyers spend a lot of time, including the court, talking to jurors about whether they're biased. Why? Because people who are biased or come across as biased, they're out of here. You can't serve on that jury. You cannot be fair. We don't let judges serve on cases if they have a bias. They are recused. Many times they just recuse themselves. They recognize there's a bias. And we don't let people testify unless the bias, when they testify, is allowed to be brought out. In other words, if a witness is testifying, let's say you, for example, both sides are entitled to bring out the bias for or against the, about the witness that is against the offender, let's use in that case. Because in our justice system, things must be fair and things must look fair. There must not be bias and there must not be a look of bias by anyone. That's the way our system works. Now, in my opinion, my opinion is not any better than anybody else's, but I have seen a lot of people over the years, kind of in the people business, judging people. And I have heard your statements today And it seems to me that your own words have shown your bias. You say you're not biased, but we base things on evidence, not based necessarily on words. And your words to me prove your bias. Your attitude proves your bias. Your arrogance proves your bias. And I think your protesting too much proves your bias. But be that as it may, the scary part of that is not whether you're biased or not. The scary part of it is, well, what about other people in the FBI? What about people we don't know about that have the same attitude that you do about people who are being investigated by the FBI? That is what is scary, because people out here, the rest of us who don't get to work for the FBI or the Justice Department, we are concerned about our justice system doing the right thing for the right reason and making sure that our justice system is just. And part of the fairness and justice is that there isn't a bias for or against anybody as they go through the system. Now, based on what you said, I don't think I would ever allow you as a juror to be on a criminal case, ever. I don't know that the defense attorney or the prosecutor would allow you to be on a jury, because your words are what we hear. Your protesting just seems to make those words more of a show of your bias. The comment that you're going to stop him in an email or a text or something, that not only shows your bias, that shows that you're going to act on your bias and you're going to stop President Trump. That's the way it comes across. The evidence comes across. So how do you assure us that the attitude that you have shown us today of the text messages and all of these things that we've been talking about, how do we know that's not rampant throughout the FBI? How do we know that?
Sir, what I would answer to you.
Can you just answer that question?
Yes.
How do we know that there's not bias in the FBI in this particular investigation or other investigations? How do we know that?
Sir, the way you do that is exactly what you suggested. You look to the evidence. You look to the actions of the men and women of the FBI in the conduct of their cases. You look to my actions in the conduct of the investigations. You have done, with others, a spectacular job of equating the word bias with personal political belief. And it's astounding how effective that's been. But you know full well they are not the same. The fact of bias
Reclaiming my time. You'll have a chance to try to answer the other question that you're trying to answer. How do we know that the attitude that you have shown us to date, whatever you want to call it, you know, that Mr. Cohen wants to make a saint out of you. How do we know that the attitude you have today is not the same attitude of the FBI as they're investigating other cases? How do we know that?
I'd ask that the witness be
Time of the
permitted to
gentleman
answer
has
the
expired, and the gentleman may answer the question.
hopefully without interruption.
Sir, the way you judge that is what I said. You look at the evidence. You look at the acts. What FBI agents and analysts and everybody else do. You look at what I did. You look at what the Inspector General concluded, not only me, but all the agents and assistant directors and EADs and DDs and everybody involved in the investigation, and you see that the evidence unequivocally is there is no act of bias. So this false assertion that you're making that political personal belief must equal bias, that somehow we've merged those two words together in the dictionary, is one of the triumphs of what's been going on recently that I cannot disagree with more. A judge asks jurors, are you able to set aside your personal opinions and render a judgment based on the facts? Sir, you know that based on your extensive experience. What I am telling you is that I and the other men and women of the FBI every day take our personal beliefs and set those aside in vigorous pursuit of the truth wherever it lies, whatever it is.
And I don't believe you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Let's be clear about what's going on here. We understand that President Trump doesn't like this investigation. We understand that. That's clear. But what we've seen in this joint committee and in the Judiciary Committee meeting just a couple weeks back, with members of the House demeaning themselves by asserting that the Deputy Attorney General sat there under oath and lied. Today, repeated assertions that Mr. Strzok is sitting before us under oath, lying to us. The efforts to impugn the credibility not just of Mr. Strzok, but of the entire FBI. It's shameful, truly shameful. The depths to which some of my colleagues have plummeted in order to advance a narrative to support the president's opposition to an investigation, which is an investigation, as Mr. Strzok pointed out, and as too many of us seem to have forgotten, is an investigation into the Russians' efforts to destabilize the democracy of the United States of America. I wish that the attacks that have been leveled against Mr. Strzok, the attacks on Rod Rosenstein, the attacks on our FBI director, I wish there was even a slight degree of that same fervor directed against what the Russians did in 2016 so that we could get to the bottom of that and anticipate what they're trying to do this November and in 2020. Now, Mr. Strzok, this is the Inspector General's report. The number one finding in this Inspector General's report is that the FBI should not discuss ongoing criminal investigations. That's what the IG said Director Comey did wrong. The IG said he shouldn't have done it. The IG went into great detail about the long-standing practice and the reasons for that practice to protect the integrity of ongoing criminal investigations. In this case, the investigation that I just referred to, a direct attack by a foreign adversary. But listening to my Republican colleagues, it's almost as if they never read this report. Like you never bothered to pick it up. Or worse, you read it, you understand it, but you don't care. You're asking Mr. Strzok to do exactly what the Inspector General said not to do. Exactly. Mr. Strzok, if you answer these questions that you've been asked about this investigation, are you concerned that the Inspector General could investigate you and issue a report just like this one that says that you should never have done that?
Certainly that's possible. I'd be more worried about the impact on the ongoing investigation.
I understand. It's a ridiculous position to put you in. The Inspector General explained in this nearly 600-page report that the mistake Director Comey made was discussing the ongoing steps the FBI was taking in the Hillary Clinton investigation. Here's what we've heard today. We heard it from the chairman. We heard it from my colleagues. You've got two choices. You can ignore the FBI's policy that has been put in place to protect these investigations. I'm going to let you talk about that in a second. And answer the questions, in which case maybe you trigger an IG report. Or you don't answer those questions, and maybe we hold you in contempt. Now, can you just, again, since this has been a really long day, can you explain why it's important not to interfere with ongoing criminal matters?
Well, there are a variety, and I'm sure I won't come up with all the reasons, but the first is we do a lot of investigations where we never charge anybody, and it's simply not fair to, given the investigative power we have, to do something that would unnecessarily tarnish them or their image. Two, in the cases where we are investigating, talking about it is going to screw up a bunch of things you might want to do investigatively, talking to witnesses, talking to the subject. And then finally, you want somebody to have a fair trial. And if we're talking about it or putting our finger on the scale, it would just be horribly inappropriate and against what we stand for in the criminal justice system.
And the negative consequences on the outcome of that investigation?
It would be tremendous. Would adversely impact potentially the ability to get a fair trial, to conduct a competent investigation, to conduct one that arrived at the truth.
Right. Mr. Strzok, I appreciate that last comment, and I would just urge my colleagues that in the midst of this apoplexy that seems to be breaking out among so many of my colleagues, that we remember that ultimately what we're really trying to do here is get to the truth. And the truth that we need to get to is exactly what a hostile foreign adversary did to interfere with our democracy. Let's please keep that in mind as we move forward. Let's make that the focus. That's what the American people are expecting. That's what they're counting on us to do. Get out of the way. Let this investigation go forward. Let's get to the truth. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marine, is recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Strzok, I have here, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, the Ethics Handbook of Department of Justice, of which the FBI falls under.
Yes.
And there are several paragraphs that I want to read to you. First one is general principles of ethical conduct. Continued. Employees shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that they are violating the law or the ethical standards set forth. Whether particular circumstances create an appearance that the law or these standards have been violated shall be determined from the perspective of a reasonable person with a knowledge of the relevant facts. Next one is appearance of impropriety. An employee shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that the employee is violating the law or the ethical standards set forth in these guidelines. Furthermore, it states, for employees for whom a security clearance is required, and you do have a security clearance, correct?
Today I do, yes.
You've had one for quite a while,
Yes.
other than the circumstances.
Yes.
For performance of their official duties, prohibited conduct, and more may be grounds for suspension or revocation of a clearance. This could also result in adverse disciplinary action, including suspension or removal. Under the Hatch Act, all federal employees may vote, express opinions, and make political contributions under the Hatch Act. Active participation in partisan political activities by federal employees is restricted. And employees, and now I want you to listen to this very carefully, serving in certain positions are more restricted than others. I think you are a person that falls into that category as well. I am just actually disheartened about the situation that you are in. And I say this with no prejudice, and I think you are your own worst enemy. You have an answer for everything. You have an attitude that is very obvious today, and you are the kind of witness that you and I, as a prosecutor for 18 years, a district attorney and a U.S. attorney, would love to get on the stand. And the reasonableness of the statements that you made, and I'm not going to get into the language, but the repetitiveness of it. Where was your judgment? What were you not thinking when you were sending the emails and the statements that you made and the comments in that of the people in Virginia? I would expect someone of your caliber to be way above that. You got carried away. You got impressed with yourself, and you're in a position that I'm sorry that that's the case. But if you are trying to draw a distinction, a wide distinction between bias and political opinion, there's not the wide distinction that you are drawing at this point. Because I would bet the farm that if you were sitting next to me as the investigating prosecutor, and I was the prosecutor, and Judge Poe or another judge were handling the case, whether it's civil or criminal, you and I would be pointing out the biases that I see that you have exhibited here. I just don't understand your judgment based on your background, and you may respond to that.
Sir, I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your concern. The first thing I would tell you is I'm disappointed if you did not understand the amount of regret that I expressed from the beginning of my opening statement to the harm and damage this has caused people I love and the institution
I do understand that now, sir. I do understand, but it's in hindsight. And people like you and I that are here to protect the citizens, we should be thinking of this before.
Congressman, without question, and I would absolutely agree with you that there are things that I regret in retrospect. And I hope that comes across today. I know a large portion of today has been combative in a way that has nothing to do with my sense of regret and remorse. I would draw, since you brought up the ethics manual, I would note in that manual, in further restricted employees, every FBI employee, many DOJ employees, other members of the intelligence community are restricted. But within that category, if you read that manual, citing the Hatch Act, it says, except for where otherwise prohibited, and that has to do with activities coordinating with a political party, employees may not only have political opinions, but they are encouraged to express them privately and publicly.
Yeah.
So, sir, well, I don't draw any disagreement with you about bias where it occurs. What I disagree with you and so many people today is that political belief does not equate to bias, and we always have to go to the evidence. If you can demonstrate evidence of acts of bias, well, then bias is there. But in the absence of any, and truly, the Inspector General, this committee, any number of other people have looked and looked and looked, and not a single act tells me it didn't occur, because really competent people have looked for it. And so beyond me telling you under oath that I know it didn't happen, what's important to realize is it's not just me. It's this entirety of folks looking at it. It is the entirety of structure of the FBI who is built not to do those things and not to allow it in others.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes.
I know it's been a long day for you, so I will keep it simple. Some questions will be repetitive, but if you could just say yes or no. In your time at the FBI, have you ever investigated a member of the Democratic Party?
Yes.
Did any of those investigations result in an indictment?
No, not to my recollection.
Have you ever investigated anyone that identifies as independent or unaffiliated with either of the two major political parties?
Ma'am, I don't know.
So you don't know if any of those resulted in?
Well, I don't know that. I know when I'm thinking of the Democratic Party, clearly Secretary Clinton was part of who we looked at, and she was very clearly part of the Democratic Party. I don't tend to, beyond that, I'm not a public corruption agent, and political affiliation is not something we looked at.
But in your assessment, would your work history suggest a bias by you toward any one political party?
No, not at all.
You investigated, as you said, Secretary Clinton for use of private emails.
Yes.
She is a member of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
We know you have investigated a Republican, provided your participation in the ongoing Mueller investigation, and we know that that investigation has led to an indictment. In fact, it has led to 19 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and a host of charges filed against former campaign and White House advisors to President Trump, as well as Russian nationals and companies. So is it fair to say that you have investigated and indicted individuals from the political spectrum? Or you may not even be aware of them.
Yes, ma'am. We don't look at that, so I don't know, but it's a fair assumption.
There have been news reports that President Trump's advisors, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Stephen Miller, and former White House official Stephen Bannon, Reince Priebus, and Gary Cohn all used private email to conduct official business. President Trump is a Republican, correct?
Yes.
So these individuals were our key staffers for a Republican president, correct?
Yes.
These individuals serve or served as senior advisors to the president, White House chief strategist, White House chief of staff, and director of the National Economic Council. It is safe to say that individuals in such high-ranking positions are exposed to sensitive, perhaps top-secret materials.
Yes.
To your knowledge, has the FBI opened investigations against their use of private emails for official White House business?
I'm going to answer that. I can't answer that based on if they were ongoing. It would be inappropriate for me to talk about them.
Okay. I would like to note that neither the House Judiciary Committee nor the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee have open hearings on that issue, and several of those individuals named continue to advise the President of the United States and receive a paycheck paid by our tax dollars. Also, I'd like to say when constituents call my office, they are Dems, they are Republicans, they're independents, and they're not involved like all of us. And if you ask them, I am sure that they would say they receive top-notch service from my office, and I have my biases like everybody else, like we've talked about. And listening to the conversation today, I have to wonder about some of my Republican colleagues, not everybody, but since you apparently think that biases prevent people from doing their best job, it makes me wonder what happens when Democrats call your office. Do you not give them the same service as you give your Republican constituents? Because that's what you keep implying over and over and over and over. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Sanford, for 5 minutes.
I appreciate it, Chairman, and if I might, I'm going to yield my time to my colleague from Ohio.
Oh, my.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Agent Strzok, I want to go back to this email you sent on January 10th regarding the BuzzFeed pending publishing of the dossier. You have that in front of you again?
I do.
Okay, my last round of questioning, you said you spoke with Bruce Orr several times in the 2016-2017 time period. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And at the time you were working with Mr. Orr, did you know that he was meeting with representatives from Fusion, including Glenn Simpson?
May I consult with counsel, sir?
You sure can. If you could hold my time, please.
Sir, again, I would like to answer your question, and it's a short and easily answerable question, but at the direction of the FBI, I cannot discuss the content of the operational matters that I discussed with Mr. Orr.
I appreciate that, Agent Strzok. At the time you were meeting with Bruce Orr, did you know that his wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion?
Again, I believe the same answer. Stand by, sir, again, please. I'm sorry about the time. Sir, again, I'm sorry. I would like to answer that question, but at the direction of the FBI, because it relates to an ongoing operational matter, I can't.
Let's go back to the email. I just want to make sure I understand this. It sounds like in your email you're saying comparing now, it sounds like there are 3 copies but 2 different versions. The set you are examining and referencing to your colleagues, you say is identical to what McCain had, again referring to the dossier, and then you're saying the one from Corn and Simpson, you won't tell me who those individuals are, but that one is different. Is that an accurate reading of your email?
Sir, it isn't, and I think to give you the content or the context of that comment, I would have to. I have to tell you, sir, this is more frustrating for me than it is for you.
I'm not sure about that.
To frame that, to give you an accurate answer, I would have to give you the context of what was going on, which includes details that I've been instructed by the FBI that I may not provide.
Well, there's another email down below on the one you're looking at, which talks about BuzzFeed has 16 of the reports. Looks like they have 16 of the, I believe, 17 sections that made up the entire dossier. Is that an accurate reading there?
Sir, again, it's not an accurate reading. I would tell you what the FBI has told me I may say in answer to the dossier is that...
Well, that's not an accurate reading. That's what it says. BuzzFeed has 16 of the reports.
Well, sir, that is a literal reading, but understanding what that means would it require me to provide information that is beyond the scope of what the FBI has permitted me to tell you.
Well, we'd sure like to know. I want to refer you to, I don't know that you have this in front of you, but this is the House Intelligence Committee's report. Chapter 6, there's a footnote on page 113, and it says this. In late March 2017, Daniel Jones met with the FBI regarding PQG, the Penn Quarter Group, which he described as exposing foreign intelligence or foreign influence in Western elections. He told the FBI that PQG was being funded by 7 to 10 wealthy donors located primarily in New York and California, who provided approximately $50 million. He further stated that PQG had secured the services of Steele, his associate, and Fusion GPS to continue exposing potential Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Are you familiar with this meeting Mr. Jones had with the FBI?
I'm not, and I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I'm not aware.
I'm going from the intelligence report that the majority issued from the House Intelligence Committee.
I'm not aware of that meeting or who that is.
Have you ever spoke with Daniel Jones?
No.
Do you know Mr. Jones at all?
I do not.
All right. I want to go back to one more question I asked you the first round, Mr. Strzok. Mr. Simpson, when he did testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, was asked about Fusion. No one from Fusion ever spoke with the FBI. Is there any way that that contradicts what's in the email that I've been referencing with you?
I don't know. I can tell you I have not spoken to Mr. Simpson.
You've not spoken to Mr. Simpson.
I have not.
I asked you that the first time. All right. I thank the chairman and I thank the gentleman from South Carolina for yielding. I yield back to the gentleman.
The chair would note that several of the questions asked by the gentleman were not answered by the witness on the advice of his counsel, and I presume through the FBI. And we will note those questions so that we can address them at a future time, because I find it stunning that they are not allowing you to answer those questions, Mr. Strzok. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The chairman started this hearing by saying, I wish this hearing wasn't necessary. Well, sorry if I don't believe that. Of course, he wants this hearing, and it isn't necessary. Now, I think there are hearings that are necessary, and we see them every day. There are 3,000 children separated from their moms and dads, and the government doesn't know where their moms and dads are and can't even bring them together. That seems like something the Judiciary Committee should be investigating. We start a policy in this country where we ban Muslims from coming in, and we make a test, a religious test. Sounds to me like something the Judiciary Committee should take up. We have a president of the United States. There are 16 women who have come forward to say that the president of the United States has attacked them. And what does this committee do? No hearings. Even one of the members of this committee had to resign in disgrace because he asked one of his staffer for $1 million if she would carry a baby for him. Do we have any hearings on the state and the plight of women in the workplace in America? No. These are all things and issues that are on the American people's minds. But we don't want to talk about those issues. Those should be issues that I believe are pertinent and should have hearings before this committee. But what we want to have hearings is to bring Mr. Strzok here so that we can regurgitate and continue to say that he is lying and that he is biased and somehow he corrupted the investigation to the point that we can't believe Mr. Mueller, that we can't believe Mr. Rosenstein, that we can't believe the new FBI director who was appointed by the current president of the United States, and that we should abandon. My members on the other side, if there are two people that are thrilled and excited today, there are two people, the folks over at Fox News and at the Kremlin, because they both worked on one thing, electing President Trump, President of the United States of America. They've got to be overjoyed today at the Kremlin, and they've got to be applauding. And watch the newsreel tonight, because a lot of this today is simply what? Auditioning for Fox News, and of course, at the clapping at the Kremlin. I never thought I would see a time that the Congress of the United States would do the work of destroying. Because what do we know? We know very clearly that our men and women of the intelligence community have unanimously stated, and this is unrefutable, that the Russians work to undermine our democracy and to elect Donald Trump President of the United States. And that is something that's irrefutable. You can say what you want about Mr. Strzok, that's irrefutable. And yet we do not investigate that. How can we have such an attack on our democracy and we don't investigate? But we want to investigate Mr. Strzok. So I want to ask you, Mr. Strzok, because they've kept saying you have this bias. When did you learn, and how did you learn about the investigation into the possible collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and Russian influence in our 2016 election?
Sir, I'm limited to what Director Comey was authorized to say by the Department of Justice, but in late July.
So in late July. And when did the public learn about the investigation into Russian collusion and Donald Trump's investigation?
I don't remember a specific date, but it was well into the following year.
It was after the election?
Yes, sir.
So what we're to believe from our Republican majority, that you're so biased, you're such a Democrat that you can't hold back from trying to destroy Donald Trump, yet you never told anybody that there was an investigation into Donald Trump's campaign and collusion with the Russians? You never told anybody about that?
No, sir.
You never talked to a reporter about that?
Never.
But you had it in your hands. Well, maybe you didn't because, you know, in America, you could do almost anything. But you did have almost a magical bullet in your hand to derail the Donald Trump investigation. And did you use it?
No, sir.
No, you didn't, right? Are there Republicans that work at the FBI? Because it makes it sound like you're all Democrats. I never heard that before, but are there Republicans?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What would be interesting here is, since you like to cherry pick the Democrats that given money, the FBI agents that give money to Democrats, why don't you reveal the Republican members of the FBI that give money to Republicans? Why don't you reveal the Republican members of the FBI that are in and state very clearly when they apply for a voter registration, they apply as Republicans? They don't, because that's not what this is about. What this is about is for the American public, Mr. Strzok. It's really not about you. They want to damage and destroy our democracy. And one of the ways they do it is by taking an institution like the FBI and destroying it. And that, I think, is really regrettable. Okay, Kremlin, another good day for you. You influenced the election. You wanted Donald Trump to win. You won that one. And now you want to destroy our institutions. Congratulations, Kremlin. And congratulations to everybody that's helping them.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Strzok, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Chairman Gowdy. But in light of the last round of questioning, it's fair to say that you wanted to stop President Trump from being elected, in your own words, didn't you?
No, sir. That was my expression, that I had a preference not for candidate Trump to be president, but that I did not and would not.
Did I not hear you read your own text correctly, that you would stop him? You would stop it?
No, sir, you misunderstood or misheard me. I said that my sense, and not recalling writing that text, was that the American populace wouldn't elect
you don't like Donald Trump, do you?
Fair to say I'm not a fan, sir.
Yeah. And were you the only one who could have done the job you're doing, or were you the only one that could have led this investigation in the FBI?
Sir, it was logical, and given that I was number 2 in counterintelligence, that I would have a role in this investigation. But no, there are very qualified folks in the FBI. DADs, there are not that many at my level.
So in retrospect, then, should you have recused yourself in this case?
Absolutely not, sir.
You don't like this man. You didn't want him to become president. You had several very disparaging text messages with your friend about this, but yet you didn't once think that maybe somebody else should take this case.
No, sir, and I'll tell you what, there are times where I didn't particularly care for Secretary Clinton, and I investigated that absolutely as objectively and aggressively as I did any other investigation. So no, I don't think recusal was at all merited.
Okay. Well, that's the one thing I've struggled with here today, listening to your testimony, because I do think a man in your position and power and the respect you should have, or that people should have for you because of your position in the FBI, that you would have stopped to think that maybe there was somebody that could do a better job that didn't have such disdain for this president. You claim to be such a patriot, but once he was elected, you continued to do this. And I think that you have to accept that elections have consequences. But I'll yield the balance of my time to our chairman.
The gentleman yields. Agent Strzok, now I'm confused because I thought on that August 8, 2016 text that you did not recall typing it. And then you said that you recalled it was late at night, and that somehow mitigated the content of what you typed. So do you recall it, or was it late at night? And what else do you recall about the timing of that?
Mr. Chairman, I think my recollection and statements have been consistent across the board. I don't remember typing it. It was late at night. My sense was I can tell you what it was not. It was not a suggestion that I or the FBI take any action
Well, I'll tell you what,
influence the investigation in any way.
instead of us musing about what you meant, why don't we just go with what you said?
Okay. So I would actually rather go with what I did. But
Well,
that is, at the end of the day, that is.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second, I promise you. No, he's not. We'll stop it. And I think you've agreed that it was his candidacy, right?
Or his election. I don't think, again, not recalling writing it. His candidacy, his election, I don't recall writing it. I'm not sure what it means.
And what do you mean by stop?
Stop it, again, my sense, looking at the context, was that there was no way, coming off the heels of insulting the Khan family, that the American, and all the other statements that had been made in the comparison of genital size during a debate and everything else, that there was no way that the American population was going to elect this man. So my sense was this is a off the cuff, hey, don't worry about it sort of comment. And if you look at the next day when I send a text saying, hey, what was that? It's clear there is no conspiracy, there's no meeting of the minds, there's no suggestion of actions. It was merely a one-off comment.
And of course, it's about a week before you use the word we again in connection with an insurance policy to make sure that he was not elected president. And then we get to the day Mueller was appointed special counsel, day after. Let's go through this one again, see if it rings a bell with you. Who gives a F, one more AD, an investigation leading to impeachment with a question mark? Why are you talking about impeachment the day of special counsel's appointment?
Well, sir,
and while you're thinking about that, let me give you a few other options you could have said. An investigation leading into indictments against Russians, an investigation leading to better election security, an investigation leading into a robust response to what Russia tried to do to our country. But you didn't say any of that, Agent Strzok. You went straight to impeachment. Do you know how impeachment works?
I have a general understanding.
How does it work?
Sir, my understanding is limited to that is something done by the Congress, that there are articles of impeachment, and the procedure by which that occurs, I am not an expert.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you have to be a sitting office holder to be impeached?
Sir, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I actually do. And I will take note that you never once used the word in connection with Secretary Clinton, did you?
Sir, I did not, no.
No, you did. If you did, we don't have it. So that's an investigation where you didn't think about mentioning it, but the day Mueller was appointed, rather than punishing Russia, rather than indicting Russians, rather than doing something about social media, you went straight to impeachment.
Wrong. That's incorrect, sir.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
I'm out of time, and we'll revisit the issue.
May I respond to your question, sir?
You may when we revisit the issue.
You just asked a question. May I respond now?
Answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, the witness is permitted to answer the question briefly, as
the gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
As the chairman has repeatedly said today.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Is the witness not going to be permitted to answer the question, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object to your not permitting the witness to answer the question you asked him.
Who's the member from?
One moment while I find out who's next on the Democrat side.
Mr. Chairman, that is not the question.
Sir, you asked if I went directly to impeachment rather than Russia. I would like to respond to that question that you asked immediately.
We're going to come back to it, but if you're dying to respond to it now, as long as you do actually respond to the question.
Yes, sir. My immediate concern was absolutely having to do with Russia and everything related to that. My concern was what Russia was doing on social media. My concern was what Russian intelligence officers were doing in the United States. My concern was what the government of Russia might or might not be doing with members of the Trump campaign.
That's
was
great,
broad
Agent
and
Strzok.
robust.
That's
that
wonderful.
was my response.
That's wonderful, and trust me when I tell you, that would have been a longer text. I get that. It would have taken a lot longer for you to actually type that, but you didn't.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to just pontificate for nonstop?
The gentle lady from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Strauss, during your 11-hour closed-door interview with our committee, Republicans asked you more than 200 questions on the special counsel's and the FBI investigation of the Trump, Russia collusion and interference with the 2016 election. At one point, you described how the special counsel's investigation had, and I quote, credible allegation that the government of Russia had offered assistance to elements and matters of the Trump team on the election. Is that correct?
I believe so. I don't have a copy of the transcript, so I will.
And subsequently, Rep. Meadows followed up with this question. He stated, and I quote, there was evidence that Russia was trying to do it. There was no evidence the other way around. Do you recall that?
I don't remember that specific exchange, ma'am.
You told, and I'm going from the transcript,
And I'll accept
you
your
told Rep. Meadows that you understood his question but could not answer in an unclassified setting. It appears from your transcript, sir, that you interpreted his question as, quote, whether or not there were any reciprocation of that by members of the Trump team in offering their assistance back to Russia. You later continued to explain, and I'm quoting from your transcript, as whether or not there was information about whether elements of the Trump campaign were themselves engaging in that. I can't answer that in an unclassified setting, and furthermore, I don't think the FBI or special counsel would want me commenting on ongoing investigations. So just to be clear, the question of whether the Trump campaign was trying to collude with Russia calls for a classified response and a response that would involve information that's part of an ongoing investigation. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I certainly would not want you to reveal any classified or sensitive investigative information in this setting. We have repeatedly gone back and forth with that, and I don't understand why we have to repeat things repeatedly to such an intelligent group of people. Back in March, Chairman Gowdy stated on national TV, and I quote, and if you believe, as we have found, that there's no evidence to collusion, you should want Special Counsel Mueller to take all the time and have all the independence he needs to do his job. Chairman Gowdy also stated, and I quote, when you're innocent, if the allegations of collusions with the Russians, there's no evidence of that, you are not innocent of that, act like it. If President Trump and his allies want us to believe that there's no collusion with Russia, and that's what this is about, I would suggest that they take Chairman Gowdy's recommendation and begin acting like it. And I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Idaho is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your opening testimony today, you stated that, quote, not once did my personal bias interfere with my judgment. There's no evidence of bias in my professional actions. Close quote. Okay, let's explore that statement for a second. Can you please define, because I'm really confused, can you define, what's your definition of bias?
I think, sir, bias depends on the context in which you're talking about. With regard to political opinion, that is allowing your beliefs to get in the way of the honest, independent pursuit of facts.
So allowing your own beliefs to get in the way of your actions.
Of your honest, right, of your honest,
okay.
Of the honest, open pursuit.
Please give me an example of a situation when bias would interfere with your aspect, your professional judgment.
It's difficult to answer a hypothetical. I'm not going to interview a witness. I am going to destroy evidence. I am going to prevent somebody from taking an investigative step. I'm not, it's a difficult hypothetical.
Has there ever been a time when your professional actions or you believe that you had bias, that you needed to move on from an investigation at any time?
No.
No. Has there been a time in your career that you recused yourself from a professional action?
No.
Okay. So you'll be surprised, but I actually believe that the Russians tried to destabilize our economy, our way of life, our government. I think they have been doing it for a long time. I'm curious if this is the first time that Russia tried to interfere with an American election.
I'm aware of times where they, going back to the 60s and 70s, where they planted evidence, where they were seeking to introduce items of information that were false in newspapers. I'm not aware of any direct outreach to members of a presidential, either the candidate or his immediate team.
Did they attempt to interfere in the 2012 elections?
I certainly did, yes.
Yeah. So do you recall when President Obama telling Russian President Medvedev that he would have more flexibility to negotiate on issues like missile defense after the 2012 election?
I don't remember that, sir, no.
He said that in a hot mic. Why wasn't that investigated?
Sir, because one, there were no allegations to my knowledge. Again, I was not in the position.
This is the President of the United States telling the Russian president that he was going to have more flexibility and he was going to do certain things. Do you recall during the debates when President Obama objected to candidate Romney that the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy book, the Cold War is over? Do you remember that?
I don't, but I believe
Okay, so you were not interested in Russian interference with our elections in 2012, but you were interested in Russian interference in 2016.
That's not true, sir.
And you were not interested in the actions of a president who was saying that Russia was no longer a foreign power that we needed to be concerned about.
Sir, I disagree with that statement.
Well, you don't even recall those statements, so I don't know how you can disagree with them.
You were characterizing my interest in their interference, and I can respond to that if you'd like.
That's fine. How can you assure the American people that you're not lying today?
Because one, as I said before, I'm doing it under oath. I'm telling you, having spent 26 years putting on a gun, putting my life at risk for this country, I am not lying to you right now.
So you're doing
More
it
than
under
that,
oath.
sir, if you don't want to take my word for it,
that's fine.
I get people might be hesitant.
Yeah.
I would say, look at the record.
Okay,
look
so
at everybody who's worked with me.
So let's look at
what
the record.
the IG said, and that will absolutely confirm
Today you
that.
stated that you don't mean it when you said Trump supporters smell. You did not really mean it when you said that, used the word impeachment. You did not mean it when you said Republicans were hillbillies. You were not telling the truth in those moments.
No, I disagree with that, sir. I said I didn't mean it when I talked about people that you could smell the support or hillbillies. That was a poor choice of words that I don't believe. I did not say I did not believe impeachment. My explanation for impeachment was very different. My explanation of impeachment was, as I considered it, that was on the far end of what might be occurring.
Okay, so
what
you
I also
went
said was the opposite.
I understand, but so finally, the Democrats have made assertions today that are just not true. First, that the IG found no bias in your actions. This is not true. The AG said, quote, "We were deeply troubled by text messages sent by Strzok and Page that potentially indicated or created the appearance that investigative decisions were impacted by bias or improper consideration."
Right, and read what you just said, sir. Potentially create the appearance. That says nothing about an act of bias. It is a hedged three-adjective description about something which I can tell you doesn't exist.
Moreover, as we describe in Chapter 9, in assessing Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russia investigation over following up on the mid-year related investigative lead discovered on the Wiener laptop in October 2016, these text messages led us to conclude that we did not have confidence that Strzok's decisions was free from bias.
Yes, sir.
So you did, there was no decision that there was no bias. They just cannot find whether there was bias or not. And moreover, they did not really
Mr. Chairman, regular order.
They did not investigate the Russian investigation in the IG report, so there's going to be still pending reports.
Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman is out of time and yields back. The gentleman from
May I
New York,
respond,
Mr. Jefferson.
to his question?
I didn't hear a question.
I don't agree with it. He was asking me whether or not whether I believe that the IG report indicated that there was an act of bias or not. And I was
all right.
They're afraid to hear you answer, but I'd like to ask the witness be permitted to answer a question.
May I respond, sir?
Sure.
Sir, let's look at the facts of that laptop. The facts of that laptop are within hours, literally less than 4 hours of learning of that laptop. I assigned agents to go and check in and figure out what to do with that
Mr. Chairman, that wasn't the
question. Within a day, they had done so. And these were folks unrelated to
the gentleman from Idaho has yielded back. If you want to give a short response to a question he does not believe he asked, you're welcome to do it, but just keep it short.
Mr.
Sure,
Strzok,
yes, sir.
speak clearly into the mic, to raise the mic, please, for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sir, I would take issue, I do take issue with the IG's conclusion there. The IG said something that they could not exclude the possibility that it played a role, and what I would point you and point them to are the facts, and the facts are these. Within hours of learning of the Wiener laptop, I assigned very seasoned supervisory agents and subordinate agents and analysts to follow up on that. And within a day of getting that information, they had gotten in touch with New York, determined that New York had not completed the processing, and that they were going to get back together when that occurred. So the notion that anything was backburnered is belied by the facts that literally within 24 hours of learning of that information, I had assigned people who, by the way, had nothing to do with the Russia investigations to follow up on the matter.
All right, you've been given a chance to answer. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Strzok, the investigation into possible Trump-Russian collusion in the 2016 election has resulted in 23 indictments, correct?
I don't know the number, but it's sizable.
It's resulted in 18 individuals who have been indicted, true?
Again, I don't know the numbers, but I'll...
3 corporate entities have been indicted in connection with the Trump-Russian collusion investigation, correct?
I'll accept your representation. I don't know.
The investigation has identified at least 75 different criminal acts, correct?
Again, sir, I haven't tallied them up.
There have been 5 guilty pleas, true?
I believe that's correct, sir, but I'm not certain.
Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, has been charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States of America, correct?
He's been charged. I don't know the specific crimes.
He's sitting in jail right now as a result of alleged witness tampering, correct?
Yes, sir.
Trump's former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, has pled guilty to lying to the FBI, correct?
Yes, sir.
Trump's deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, has been indicted for conspiracy to defraud the United States, correct?
Sir, he's been indicted. I don't know the charges.
George Papadopoulos, a former Trump campaign national security advisor, has pled guilty to lying to federal investigators about his contacts with Russian spies during the campaign, true?
Certainly with Russians, I don't know how to characterize those Russians.
Okay, now the FBI publicly disclosed information about the Hillary Clinton email investigation 11 days prior to the election in 2016, true?
Yes, sir, I believe that's right.
But the FBI maintained confidentiality about the Trump-Russia criminal investigation during the entire duration of the Trump presidential campaign, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if you really wanted to stop Donald Trump from becoming president, you could have revealed the criminal investigation into the Trump campaign to the American people prior to the election, true?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Strzok, you are before this committee for one reason: to serve as a monumental distraction. There is a criminal investigation into the Trump campaign and possible crimes related to the 2016 presidential election involving collusion with Russian spies to sell out our democracy and hijack the presidency. My colleagues in the cover-up caucus don't like that criminal investigation, and therefore they need to identify a villain. Mr. Strzok, tag, you're it. Here's what's so ironic about that characterization. Vladimir Putin is a thug and a dictator who hijacked and interfered and attacked our democracy. But apparently, he doesn't meet the Republican villain test. Our so-called commander-in-chief continues to play footsie with him. Kim Jong-un murders his people and has threatened nuclear annihilation against American cities. But apparently, he doesn't meet the Republican villain test. The administration continues to engage in fake negotiations with him. David Duke and neo-Nazis, apparently for some, don't meet the Republican villain test. Oh, that's right, I forgot. There are fine people on both sides. Roy Moore, an alleged serial pedophile, apparently doesn't meet the Republican villain test. He was the nominee of your party for a seat in the United States Senate. But we're supposed to believe that Agent Peter Strzok, a former Army officer who has served the FBI with distinction, yes, made some mistakes, is the gravest existential threat to our democracy. How dare you lecture us about villains when your party continues to turn a blind eye to that parade of degenerates that I just listed? This investigation is a joke. It's a fraud. This hearing is a kangaroo court. It is a three-ring circus. It is not even meritorious of an investigation by Ace Ventura, pet detective, let alone 75 members of the United States Congress. Let's stop wasting taxpayer dollars and get back to the business of the American people.
Gentleman from New York yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield my time to you.
Thank the gentleman from North Carolina. Agent Strzok, on March the 14th, 2017, I think we're, a couple of months into the presidency? See if you can recall this text that you received. Finally, 2 pages away from finishing ATPM. Do you know the president resigns in the end? What is ATPM?
I believe it's a reference to the book All the President's Men.
All right. Do you recall how you replied?
Generally, I feigned surprise and said something to the effect that we should be so lucky or fortunate.
No, it was lucky. Lucky in what way?
Sir, that he would resign as president.
You wanted him to resign 2 months into his presidency?
Sir, my sense was, in a personal belief, that I was not pleased with the direction and things that were being done with the presidency.
I thought you trusted the American people. I thought that was what you said in August of 2016, that the American people would stop him, and then they didn't stop him, and here we are in March, all of a sudden not trusting the American people anymore.
Sir, I utterly trust the American people. What I worry about is when the government of Russia puts their fingers on the scale and causes the will of the American people to be something other than America electing
How many
that president.
indictments have there been of Americans for collusion with Russia?
Sir, I couldn't answer that question.
Sure you could.
Well, when
you worked on the investigation.
When you say that, first, you know full well, sir, collusion is not a crime. I don't know where that term came from, but
well, you're right.
It's not.
It's not conspiracy, coordination, collusion. A lot of people use those words in the same way. How about we say conspiracy?
Sure.
How many Americans have been indicted for conspiring with Russia to impact the 2016 election?
None, to my knowledge.
Yet.
And we'll be happy to get Mr. Nadler as a witness at next week's hearing if he wants to help you answer that. So you wanted President Trump to resign 2 months into his presidency.
No, sir. I think I read that text as a snarky comment about a book that was being read and a comment made. It is a conversational text exchange. It is not a written expression of a desire for something to occur.
Well, maybe I missed it. Well, help me. God, that we should be so lucky.
Yes, sir, and I think you would accept as a very intelligent, sophisticated man that people frequently speak when they're texting or in conversation. You'll say things that are hyperbole or exaggerations or not literal because that's just the nature of the way
Usually, Agent Strzok, not when I was supposed to be dispassionately, neutrally investigating someone. I actually did not, but let's go. Let's go. We've already passed the who gives a F. One more AD versus an investigation leading to impeachment. And I think we've already established that there is a school of thought that you can be impeached even if you're not a current office holder. You can be barred from holding office in the future, but you did not engage in any impeachment analysis in your other 2016 investigation with Secretary Clinton. You saved all of that for candidate Trump. So I want to go to another text. You and I both know the odds are nothing. If I thought it was likely, I'd be there, no question. Now, this is the day after Mueller was appointed. When you said be there, are you talking about on his team?
Yes, sir.
I hesitate in part because of my gut sense and concern. There's no big there. So in addition to disappointing the hell out of my Democrat colleagues that someone who was investigating Russian collusion didn't think there was any there, why would you be concerned? Why would you not be ecstatic that there was no collusion? Why the word concern?
Sir, I don't know what I meant. Concern to me seems like there is a lot going on and a lot presumptive that there may be something like impeachment. But, sir, you got to pick. Which one do you want? I'm either convinced that there's impeachment, or I'm convinced what you just read, that there's no there. And the reality, sir, if you look at it, is the fact that I was looking at this with an open mind and saying, I don't know what there is.
Actually, Agent Strzok, of all the universe of options, that's not the one I picked. But of all the universe of options, you looking at something with an open mind is not the one I picked.
But that's the obvious one to conclude from that email.
I'll tell you the one that I picked. The one I picked, and it breaks my heart to say this about an agent for an agency that I have tremendous respect for. You as a counterintelligence officer had no interest in participating in a counterintelligence investigation that was not going to lead to impeachment.
No, sir.
That's how I read it.
Mr.
If
Chairman,
I thought it was
Mr. Chairman,
likely,
Mr.
I'd
Chairman,
be there, no question.
You are assuming someone
I
else's
hesitate in
position.
part.
Chairman, you're coming to conclusions on someone else's viewpoints in the hearing. Allow the witness to respond.
I'm pretty sure it's my time and the gentlelady's not recognized. I hesitate in part because of my gut sense and concern. There's no big there.
Sir, may I
What
respond?
were you concerned wasn't there?
Sir, my concern was not knowing, given these allegations, what existed. Whether on the one hand, there was no criminal activity whatsoever, towards the middle, that there were individuals kind of pursuing their own agendas for their own self-enrichment, or on the far end, that there might be an impeachable offense.
Why wouldn't you want to investigate it?
May I answer your question?
Well, my question is, why would you not want to investigate that?
Sir, I did want to investigate that. That is not what you're reading. What you are reading is my trying to decide what I want to do with the course of my career and whether to stay as a Deputy Assistant Director in the Counterintelligence Division, where I have oversight of a wide variety of threats around the globe, or whether I want to remove myself and go work on something in the Special Counsel's office that is very specific, that is going to take, I don't know how long it was going to take.
Yeah. Well, you're leaving,
so, sir, but what to your point?
You're leaving out one really important word, Agent Strzok, impeachment.
So
that was in all of your text.
Regular order. It's now a minute and a half over. Does it, Mr.
Sorry,
Chairman,
if we
you
made that one
go on and on and on as long as
the
you
quicker
want?
I can go.
Point of order.
I would take
Time is
one
up.
big word of impeachment and add 4 big words of no big there. And the reality is, you know full well I said both, and you know why I said both. Why I did that and what I'm telling you under oath is that I did not know what existed. I had prejudged nothing. That was all to be determined. And that is a logical way for investigators, attorneys, and everybody else to approach an investigation.
Starting with the political death penalty and impeachment is not the logical way a neutral, dispassionate...
point of order.
Mr. Chairman, we're demanding equal time
not
for every member of this
testifying
committee.
Jersey is
person here,
recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
And if you can't control yourself, how do you expect this committee to control itself? You've been out of control since you've been on this committee. Why don't you leave it alone? This is not Benghazi.
The gentlelady from New Jersey is recognized.
You're recognized, Congresswoman. You're recognized.
When she finishes.
Well, hallelujah. First of all, Mr. Strozak, I want to thank you for your service. Secondly, Mr. Strozak, I think you made a big mistake by putting those text messages on your business phone, because then you opened up your personal phone, and here we are talking about this mess when it really isn't important. Because the other thing that I know, Mr. Strozak, is that even if you do have biases, you did not influence the outcome of this investigation. The IG found that the outcome of this investigation was predicated upon evidence and information. The other thing I know is that no matter how much you disliked Hillary and or Donald Trump, You didn't have anything to do with either one of them getting elected. You have nothing to do with the President of the United States disgracing this country every single solitary day when he embraces our enemies and sucks up, embraces our enemies and is disrespectful to our allies. You have nothing to do with the fact that the President of the United States has declared higher tariffs in the name of security to this nation against our closest friend and neighbor, Canada, but no one on this side of the aisle has opened their mouth. You have had nothing to do with the president enriching himself with his emoluments and carving out opportunities for his daughter so that she's not negatively impacted with her brands in China, while this side of the aisle says nothing. You've had nothing to do with the fact that Puerto Rico is still underwater and without any kind of electricity in so many places, while this side of the aisle, that's a part of the Oversight Committee, has forgotten what its mission is. But nonetheless, you have been here and you have tried to answer their questions, and I have never seen my colleagues so out of control, so angry, and so desperate to protect a president that we all know is not fit to be president. So I want to leave you this opportunity. Is there any question on the table, Mr. Strozak, that you've been asked that you'd like to clarify? Because I can give you 2 minutes and 25 seconds to have your say uninterrupted.
Congresswoman, I deeply appreciate that time. I do want, everybody's watching this and making up their own mind. And what I would tell you is, one, I'm sitting here telling you the truth. And two, independent of me, I cannot express to you my love of the FBI enough. The men and women who make up that workforce, their ethics, their integrity are unmatched anywhere in the world. And I think that's important, one, because it is who we are. Two, that none of them would accept any of the behaviors that are being alleged any more than I would accept it in him. And three, this entire exercise comes at a cost. We are doing things that are going to, in the future, tear down the underpinnings of what represent law and order in this country. And there is not a robust, thick wall there. I think people don't appreciate how tenuous the balance of the rule of law versus chaos is. And when we, as a people, engage in activity where we take institutions wholesale, whether it's the FBI or the U.S. intelligence community, and compare them to Nazis, we destroy things that, one, we may not see for years and years and years, and once we break those down, the amount of time it takes to fix is going to be tenfold. And I cannot stress enough that I ask all of you to take deeply your responsibility to maintain our system of
Thank you,
government.
Mr. Strozak. I just need to say in closing, if anybody should be pissed at the FBI because you all helped this unfit man become president of the United States by not revealing to the people that he was under investigation in his campaign, it should be me. They should be applauding you, kissing you, and giving you all awards, because but for you, we would have had a legitimate president elected. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, as you are aware, under House rules, minority members have the right to demand a day of hearings to allow witnesses to testify on the subject of today's hearing. As you also know, during the course of today's hearing, the majority opposed Representative Swalwell's motion to subpoena Steve Bannon for testimony. On behalf of the minority members of both the Judiciary and Government Reform Committees, I am delivering a letter to Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy, formally invoking our right to call a minority day of hearings so that Steve Bannon may testify, and I ask unanimous consent to insert a copy of that letter into the hearing record.
Without objection.
Thank
Gentleman
you.
from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, I appreciate you being here. Thank you, and I will assure you I take this very seriously. But also, I want to, as you go in and look in, there's been a lot of talks about text. There's been a lot of talk about your bias, non-bias, your opinions, and your willingness to elaborate on that. I have some questions that will not require you to have to be elaborate or anything. They're going to be simple, straightforward questions, because as I've been looking through this and also talking to the current FBI director, the current deputy attorney general, and reading through some things have popped up that I think at least need some clarification. When was the last time you were subject to a polygraph?
Approximately 2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago. To your knowledge, have you ever failed a polygraph or found to be out of scope?
I've never failed one. I was out of scope prior to my last polygraph.
And that would have been at what time? You said 2 to 3 years ago. Could you be more specific?
Sir, I think we can cut to the chase. I think there's an email that talks about people being out of scope for a polygraph, which generated my last polygraph.
Oh, don't worry. We're going to be cut to the chase.
Sir, it's
so
your
January.
time,
so you want to go ahead and say it's January 2016 when you received a text or an email, correct?
Sir, if that's the date, I'll stipulate to that. I don't have those dates.
Okay, we'll take that as a stipulation. Has an examiner ever accused you of attempting to use countermeasures during a polygraph examination?
Not to my recollection, no.
You received your email in January, as you've stated, and you've stipulated to. Your polygraph was out of scope in January 2016. To your knowledge, how long was your polygraph out of scope?
Sir, I don't know. I recall it's the penultimate, the second to last polygraph I had was when I was a supervisor at Washington Field Office, which would have occurred somewhere between 2008 and 2011. My understanding of what out of scope means for the FBI is that polygraphs have a kind of 5-year span of effectiveness or validity. We had several people, we were trying to, including me, trying to get read into a particular intelligence compartment. They ran the names, me and some others were out of scope, which happens because polygraphs are, the line for polygraphs is longer than the normal.
I understand. I'm in the military, Mr. Strzok. I understand the lines for polygraph. I understand the delays in them. However, you happen to have a very secure job and a very one that is highly sensitive. Yep. So the question is, again, I would assume to answer your evasiveness, you did not know how long you were out of scope. Is that correct? Yes or no?
That's fair, sir. I was trying to recreate it by recollection, but
So yes or no, do you know how long you were out of scope?
I do not.
Okay. What steps were taken to bring you into scope?
I went and had a polygraph.
Okay, was this after the January 16 letter that you received?
It would have been afterwards, yes, sir.
Okay. If you were out of scope, when was the last time you accessed classified information?
Night before last, preparing for this.
Okay. You currently have what classification?
I have a top secret clearance with some SCI compartments.
Okay. During the time that you were out of scope, did you have access to SCI?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that it is FBI procedure that a failure or out-of-scope polygraph does not terminate a top secret, but however, a failure of this would require you to be read out of SCI access, although you could maintain your top secret? This was a direct answer from a question that I posed and was received within the last week. Were you aware that you should have been read out of any SCI information when you were out of scope?
I believe you used the word failure, which implies, in my mind, a failed poly. I am not and was not aware of the fact that an out-of-scope polygraph required a read out of SCI.
Then I accept that, Mr. Strzok, but I want to get back to the question. The answer came back from the FBI and Justice itself that is the procedure. So the next question I have is, after the 2618, you did your polygraph at what time? You said you were out of scope, you were brought in by giving a polygraph. When would that have been?
Again, sir, my recollection is the 2016 timeframe, but after that email, but I don't know when, within a month or two, I think.
Are you also aware in the publicly stated version of the IG report that there has been some serious questions and issues concerning polygraph information and lack of polygraph procedures at the Department of Justice and FBI that was brought out by the Inspector General?
I'm not generally aware that there was a report, but I'm not aware of the conclusions.
One of the general concerns on this is that when you're out of scope, and this is the answer coming back from the Department of Justice, you should have been read out of SCI. My concern is that during this time frame, you were involved in 2 very high-profile, what would have been, or at least getting ready for SCI information in which you were not read out of. This is a concern. There's nothing else from that question. I have no further questions, and I'm finished, and I yield back.
I think you misstated the conclusion there, sir. I think you said that if in the
Strzok,
event of
let me
a
Strzok.
failure, it would require a
Strzok.
readout, and that's
Mr.
not what you
Strzok,
concluded.
the gentleman from Georgia controls the time.
Mr. Strzok, I asked.
The time's over.
my
Mr. Chairman, the time's up.
May I respond, sir?
There was no question to respond to. The answer is from the Department of Justice. I read you the answer.
May I comment to what I believe is a misstatement by
Briefly.
Georgia? Sir, from your answer, what I took that to be is in the event of a failure, an individual should be read out. You are conflating that with a out of scope or failure. It is not my understanding that out of scope requires somebody to be read out. It may be. I'm not a security professional, but you appear to.
So you're out of sync right now with an answer that was received from Department of Justice, and that is an interesting answer that you just gave, that you may have been out of sync. And the question now becomes, is policies and procedures failed or not failed? This is a serious investigation, which I do take seriously, and if you were to be read out, you should have been read out. That is my final answer statement, not a question, not opposed. I yield back.
The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, is recognized for 5
And
minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I look forward to a couple of extra minutes as each of my Republican colleagues have had. Mr. Strzok, serving on this committee and representing the state of Rhode Island has been one of the greatest honors of my life. But the conduct of this committee today has been, for me, tremendously sad, embarrassing, and really dangerous to our democracy. And I want to apologize to you for the way you've been treated by this committee. And for the American people who are watching, you ought not wonder why they've lost confidence in Congress and are sick of the kind of circus that they saw being conducted in this room today. Because rather than focusing on urgent issues like family separation, reasonable efforts to reduce gun violence in our communities, considering legislation to reform our broken immigration system, passing legislation to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, addressing the inability of Americans who fall behind in their student loans to discharge that debt in bankruptcy, or oversight of the many conflicts of interest and corruption in this administration, we're having yet another hearing on the Hillary Clinton emails. What you should understand, Mr. Strzok, is the reason my Republican colleagues will not let you answer a question is because they're not interested in your answers. This is about promoting a narrative. You're a prop. So they can promote a narrative in an ongoing effort to distract from the serious investigation of the special counsel that is closing in on the Trump inner circle. This is a campaign to undermine that work. And sadly, they'll do whatever is necessary to do it in concert with the president. Attack the FBI, attack the Department of Justice, undermine the rule of law. And so your emails are a perfect foil for this effort. They're not interested in hearing your context and your explanation because it's not about you. It's about protecting the president. My colleagues have acted more like they're on the defense team for Donald Trump than exercising their very serious oversight responsibilities as members of these two committees. You know, Robert Mueller was praised to the heavens by everyone, Republican and Democratic alike, when he was appointed. Now he's a villain. What's the only thing that's changed? 19 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and the circle's closing in. So I accept your sworn testimony about the difference between bias and the actions you took. We don't have to take your word for it alone, although I do. The IG report of 500 pages, interviews, review of documents comes to the same conclusions. We find the decisions made were consistent with the analytic approach described above. We found that these specific decisions were the result of discretionary judgments made during the course of an investigation by the media agents and prosecutors, and that these judgments were reasonable. So there's a big analysis that was done. Lots of interviews, 500 pages. That's the same conclusion, the same representation you've made today. But don't be frustrated because they're not interested in that. This is about promoting a narrative. So we know, of course, Mr. Strzok, that the president, the intelligence communities unequivocally conclude that Russia interfered in our elections, that it was directed by Vladimir Putin and for the purposes of helping Donald Trump and hurting Hillary Clinton. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any reason to doubt the assessment of our intelligence agencies that may be made with high confidence?
No, sir.
And thereafter, the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan way, a Republican-led committee, came to the same conclusion. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And yet the President of the United States and members of the administration continue to deny that the Russian government interfered in our elections. In fact, just as recently as June 28th, the President said, Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our elections.
Yes, sir.
And even Secretary Nielsen said, I do not believe that I've seen that conclusion that the specific intent was to help President Trump win.
I don't recall hearing that, but
And in addition to that, you know about a Trump Tower meeting where there was a discussion between members of the Trump campaign and Russian operatives, correct?
I am aware of that.
And the president then...
Sir, I would not characterize it one way or the other as Russian operatives or not, but I'm aware of them.
Okay. And in that meeting, there was a discussion about some dirt that the Russians had on Hillary Clinton, correct?
Media reporting has indicated that.
And the president then issued a statement in which he lied about that meeting and said it was about an adoption discussion. Correct?
Those statements have been made. Again, I'm relying on what's been reported in the media, not FBI or special counsel.
So would you tell me, Mr. Strzok, in the time that I have remaining, what should we conclude, or what raises eyebrows for you about members of a presidential campaign meeting with a foreign adversary of the United States to talk about dirt about their opponent and then lying about the nature of that meeting? Why should that concern the American people?
Well, sir, I don't want to comment on any specific fact pattern or anything that relates to an ongoing investigation. So I hesitate, and I don't want to do that in this context.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note for the record, we've had 0 hearings on Russian interference in the American presidential election, 0 hearings in this committee about our efforts to secure our democracy and secure the elections coming up in November. We've had hundreds of hours devoted to Hillary Clinton's email. This committee has failed in its responsibilities to secure our elections, which is a responsibility we have to the American people. And then when we finally have an opportunity to raise the issue, instead we're going to talk about Hillary Clinton's email. Shame on all of you.
Time of the gentleman
History
has
is going to judge
expired.
you very harshly for this behavior.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you've defended your actions, said that you did not evince bias, that your actions weren't motivated by bias, but the Inspector General disagreed. When he asked you about the insurance policy text, the will stop it text, you provided an explanation similar that you did today, and he found your explanation to be unpersuasive, and you're aware of that, correct?
I'm not aware of that with regard to that text.
Well, he did. He testified when we had him in here in June in response to my questioning. He also said that your explanation for how you handled the Anthony Weiner laptop, you delayed, you didn't take action initially. He said your explanation for that, and he did note that in the report, was not persuasive. You're aware of that, correct?
Sir, I'm aware of facts rebutting that he has rebutting that specific assertion.
Well, he testified to us that he was not persuaded by your explanation for why you focused on the Trump-Russia collusion and you let the Weiner thing sit. And then he testified in front of our committee that it was reasonable to infer that your actions involving Weiner's laptop, the fact that you didn't pursue that aggressively, that it is reasonable to infer that it was because of the bias that you evince in those text messages. Are you aware of his testimony with that?
Not specific to that, but I'll accept your representation.
Yes, and I think it's important to show while the IG report said the Clinton charging decision was not necessarily due to bias, he said that the Weiner is absolutely a fair game to infer that, and then they're obviously continuing to investigate the genesis of this Russia interference case. Do you also know that Rod Rosenstein on June 28th, when he testified in front of this committee, he said you were biased? Are you aware of that?
I'm
in
not
response
aware of
to my questions? Yes, he did. And he also says that the bias that you evince, it does undermine the integrity of your investigative actions, and it causes the American people to lose confidence in the institution. Do you know he said that?
I don't, and he's...
Well, he did. So the idea that there's no bias here is not, I don't think your explanations have been credible, and I think that if you acted so appropriately, Mueller removed you from the team. You're now at Human Resources, which is obviously a demotion. And then you are now one of the subjects of an ongoing IG investigation, correct?
No, sir.
Your conduct is not being reviewed by Horowitz about what you did or did not do in the Russian collusion case.
I'm unaware of being a subject of any ongoing IG.
Well, I bet you your conduct is at issue there. Let me ask you this. You opened up the counterintelligence investigation on 31 July. Was that because of the George Papadopoulos information?
Sir, I can't get into the guidance that the FBI has provided me about answers I can provide. That gets into a level of detail that I can't, that I've been directed not to provide.
You have answered some questions. I mean, I think this has been a little bit of convenience. I mean, you've answered some questions about there was grave concerns and all this stuff about why you were doing it. You didn't do that. the dossier. Was the dossier a part of why you opened up the investigation?
No, but sir, none of this has been convenience. All of this has been based on what the department has worked out with Chairman Goodlatte about what is permitted and not. This is not a function of
So the dossier was not part of it. That's important. When did you learn the dossier was funded by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party?
I don't think that's an accurate representation, and the department or the FBI has directed me not to answer that question based on ongoing
Well, right. So Hillary, DNC sent to Perkins Coie, who sent to Fusion, who paid, I mean, come on.
Again,
it was a political document, correct?
The latter's close. I cannot comment. The FBI has directed me to not answer that question.
Would it be fair to say that the dossier was, what would you choose? Is it a political document, opposition research, or is it legitimate intelligence?
Sir, I would very much like to answer that question.
Okay.
I've been directed by the FBI that I may not get into that based on operational requirements or equities.
So here's the issue I think we have. We see the bias that you did. Your explanations for why you said what you did, really aren't credible. We're trying to get to the genesis of why open up a counterintelligence investigation against the opposing party's campaign. I'm with you about focusing on Russia and holding them accountable, but you tried to rope in the other party's nominee. There was also a lot of bias, and then we can't get any answers to the questions of what the genesis of any of this was. And let me finish. May 18th, Chairman Gowdy mentioned, you say, look, my concern's that there's no big there. So this had been going on for at least 10 months. I think it was going on before July 31st. And there you are, Mueller's appointed, and you can't even identify any reason to suspect that there was collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia. There was no big there after 10 months. So that's the concern, is that somebody like you who said we'll stop him, who said we needed insurance policy, that you let that bias, you wanted there to be something there. You wanted it to be true, and that, I think, influence your actions. You can prove us wrong by providing us the information. I'd like the information on any type of informants pre-July 31st. I'd like the information on what you used to open up the counterintelligence investigation. I want to know whether that was any foreign intelligence involved or whether it was funneled through the State Department. These are all questions that if we just put those out and answer them, then a lot of us would be able to then make I think, American people can make a judgment. I'm going over my time. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Question.
Briefly.
Sir, two things. You asked why I couldn't explain why a case would be open. I don't think that's accurate. If you look at Director Comey's statement when the Department of Justice had authorized him to say that the FBI had opened a case into allegations that the government of Russia had made an offer of assistance in the potential involvement of members of the Trump campaign. I cannot envision a scenario where that would not be a reasonable predication to open an investigation.
Well, if it's Papadopoulos, that's not quite what they had. I mean, you didn't quite get there. I know Comey may have said that, but you didn't quite get there. So if it's Papadopoulos, that's weak.
I think the characterization was that it was a credible source of information, stands on its own. I don't think anybody in this committee would argue that, one, it wasn't appropriate to open that, and two, that it wasn't absolutely
we have questions about whether it was appropriate because we don't know the underlying information.
And
we read in the New York Times from leaks that it was just because Papadopoulos said at a bar.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
I that's the reason.
I'm trying to respond.
Regular order. Regular order.
The chair recognizes the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, there's a second element of a question the gentleman. You raised the question about whether or not I agreed with the Inspector General that I had acted in any way that was biased.
You had an opportunity to answer that earlier.
Sir, I did not.
So,
to this
the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Strzok. Mr. Strzok, on July 3rd, your lawyer, Mr. Goldman, made the following statement to Chris Cuomo on CNN regarding you, his client. On Fox News, they talk about him as the center of this anti-Trump cabal that was determined to throw the election against Trump. None of this has a shred of truth. Do you agree with this statement, sir?
I do.
And in a June 19th op-ed in USA Today, your lawyer said, regarding the Russia investigation, what we call the Russia Collusion investigation, that you and your team, quote unquote, went out of their way to prevent leaks and actively ensured that news reports did not overplay the seriousness of the investigation. Is that true, sir?
Yes.
Now tell us why it's so important to prevent leaks from the FBI to journalists or to others.
Leaks are terrible. They undercut things in a variety of ways. They can upend investigations. They can lead to incorrect assumptions. They can let witnesses, subjects know that they're being investigated. They can lead to wild speculation, destruction of evidence, any number of really bad, disclosure of classified information, any number of really bad adverse things.
Got it. The DOJ IG's report has this to say about your involvement in the decision to inform Congress about the Wiener laptop. Quote unquote, Strzok explained that the decision to seek a search warrant for the Wiener laptop was known to many people beyond the mid-year team, and this raised a concern that this information could leak. Is this statement from the IG's report true?
Yes.
Now, could you unpack that for us a little bit? First of all, you said, according to the IG's report, that the search warrant for the Wiener laptop was known to many people beyond the mid-year team. Could you explain whether any of those people would be in the New York field office?
So my recollection is that the investigation of the crimes against children case, Mr. Wiener was handled out of the New York field office by the Southern District of New York, or maybe the Eastern District. I think it was SDNY.
And so the people to whom you're referring included people in the New York field office, correct?
That's correct.
And you had concerns about their actions if Director Comey did not inform Congress about this Wiener laptop.
I did not have concerns about New York. My concerns were just general, that the more people who are aware of something, the greater chance that it leaks out somehow. But those concerns were not specific in my mind to New York.
Okay. Let me ask you about this. In a report, in that same report, Attorney General Loretta Lynch recalls a conversation with then Director Comey in the final days of the 2016 election. Quote unquote, he, referring to Comey, said, "It's clear to me that there's a cadre of senior people in New York who have a deep and visceral hatred of Secretary Clinton." And he said it is, quote unquote, deep. Were you aware of this concern?
I was aware of certainly some of the press reporting and some people expressing that concern, yes.
Was one of those people Director Comey?
A person having that concern?
Yes.
Yes.
Could you explain to me a little bit about that and how that, in your view, affected the revelation of the warrant for Wiener's laptop?
You'd have to ask Director Comey that. I think there was discussion, I remember, and particularly some of it was in the context of reporting from Mr. Giuliani and others talking about connections to New York. But again, I don't want to scapegoat New York because a lot of people were aware of it and there were concerns just about the number of folks. But with regard to Mr. Comey, my recollection is that he was aware of those concerns, but I was not privy to discussions he had with the Attorney General or other concerns he might have had outside of my presence or conversation.
Now, with regard to Mr. Giuliani, on October 25th, then Trump campaign advisor Rudy Giuliani promised a quote-unquote pretty big surprise coming up in the campaign. On October 28th, Giuliani claimed to be in contact with former agents and a quote-unquote few active agents who obviously don't want to identify themselves. Let me make sure I have this right. There was a concern that there is a deep and visceral hatred towards Secretary Clinton in the New York field office. At the same time, Mr. Giuliani says that he's having contacts with agents, active agents. Can you give us your take on this and your comments on this particular issue?
I recall that comment. I recall it caused me a lot of concern.
And why? Why did it cause you concern?
Because while it's certainly possible that Mr. Giuliani is exaggerating or engaging in some sort of puffery, the reality is that also given the things that were going on, given the timing that the laptop was there and he was talking about that in the context of a big surprise, it caused me great concern that he had information about that.
In other words,
he should not have had.
That he should not have had.
Correct.
Through a leak?
Through an unauthorized disclosure, sure, leak, yes.
Thank you, sir.
The members are advised that there are votes on the floor of the House. How many? 4 votes. So, Mr. Strzok, you probably have a good 45 minutes to. All right. Members are advised that this will be the last one, so if you want to head to the floor for votes. But the chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my 5 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Sir, I can't hear you.
Just a couple questions.
That's almost 5.
Agent Strzok, in earlier round, you said you never talked to Glenn Simpson, right?
Correct.
And you never talked to Nellie Orr.
Correct.
And you wouldn't say whether you knew if Nellie Orr worked for Fusion. Is that correct?
My understanding from my direction of the FBI is I'm not permitted to answer that question.
Okay. But you did say you talked with Bruce Orr, fellow Department of Justice employee, and Nellie Orr's husband.
Yes.
But it is common knowledge that Nellie Orr worked for Fusion in the summer of 2016. Is that right?
I don't know if it's common knowledge or not.
It's been in all kinds of reports.
Oh, it is now,
all kinds
yes,
of
absolutely.
press reports. All right. You met with Bruce Orr in 2016 and 2017, so the time period that we're focused on.
To the best of my recollection, yes.
All right. And you won't tell me what you guys talked about?
Sir, I can tell you we talked about operational matters that he was involved in, but the FBI has directed me not to give you,
specifically, you can't get into specifics and details. Did Bruce Orr give you any documents?
Sir, same answer. I would like to answer that question, but the FBI has directed me not to get into.
You can't. My understanding is, Mr. Chairman, the discussions we've had with the FBI, he's allowed to tell us those kind of pieces of information. I'm not asking what the documents were. I'm just asking, did Bruce Orr ever hand you documents?
I understand full well what your question is, sir, and I would love to answer it. My understanding from the FBI is when it comes to operational details, including whether or not we collected evidence or didn't, that I'm not permitted to answer that. I would love to answer that question. All these.
I mean, you understand where I'm coming from, right, Agent Strzok?
Sir, I understand your frustration, and what I'm here to tell you is I think the answers would set you at ease.
Yeah, you understand. We got an email from you briefing everybody on the team, all the key players, Rybicki, Baker, Page, Maffa, Priestep, and Andy McCabe. And in that email, you say the dossier that you are now looking at, that BuzzFeed is printing, has differences from the one given to us by Korn and Simpson. Earlier today, I asked you who Korn and Simpson is, and you wouldn't answer that. It's kind of funny to me, because yesterday, David Korn tweeted out, he's the Korn in your email. So the guy himself's identified himself. We all know it's David Korn, and then the other name is Simpson. So you have this, and we're wondering how the dossier got to, or if, more importantly, if the dossier got to the FBI through media sources, not just through Christopher Steele. And of course, we know Nellie Orr worked for the guy you're mentioning, Glenn Simpson. She worked for him the whole time. You've never had conversations with her, but you did have a lot of important conversations on operational matters and ongoing investigations with her husband, Bruce Orr, who's also happened to be reassigned at the Department of Justice. And I'm just wondering, and you've said that, well, you won't answer the question whether Mr. Orr has given you documents or not. So I'm just wondering if that was the route. Was that the route the dossier went? Glenn Simpson to Nellie Orr, to her husband, and then to you.
Sir, I understand.
That's my frustration.
I understand your question. I understand your frustration. I understand the absurdity of something produced that you're reading that I've been directed not to answer questions about. The best I can do is tell you I would like to answer you, and I'm afraid it's an answer that would both reassure you and disappoint you.
Well, we're going to be asking, I think, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, we're going to be asking the FBI and the Department of Justice to give us those documents that may or may not have been exchanged between Mr. Orr and Agent Strzok. I think that's something this committee would like to have and see what those, if in fact there were documents, what the heck they were. I got a minute. I'll yield it to.
Sir, you're going to love this, and it's going to upset the vote. I have been instructed that the FBI has now told me that I can answer questions about the receipt of the documents. So I will defer, Mr. Chairman, if you would like to hear that or take your vote.
The gentleman may proceed with his questions, and you may answer.
May I confer with counsel briefly to see if this is completely unbounded or if there are any limitations on what I may say?
Well, I got a lot of questions I've asked all day long.
Let's ask the one you've been told you can answer.
All right, so let's hear the answer to this one.
Which question, sir?
The one that's on the table about the documents.
Sir, the documents we received from a different source in the initial batch in mid-September.
Wait. No. I'm not understanding. You said you got, go back, did you get documents from Bruce Orr?
Yes, at some point we received material from Mr. Orr.
You got documents from Bruce Orr. And what were those documents?
We received documents from Mr. Orr, not me. Excuse me, sir.
I can maybe make it simpler. Agent Strzok, was it the dossier?
Sir, what I am authorized to tell you, in response to a question, did you receive any documents from Bruce Orr, the FBI has directed me that I may say, not me, the FBI received documents and material from Mr. Orr.
Did you? I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But you did not from Mr. Orr?
No.
Okay. But the FBI did get documents from Bruce Orr?
Yes, sir.
Did they get the dossier from Bruce Orr?
My direction from the FBI, as I may tell you, the FBI received material from Mr. Orr.
Now,
Congressman, I am
this is amazing. This is amazing. So Nellie Orr,
as you are.
Nellie Orr works for Fusion, works for Glenn Simpson, and she's giving documents.
Regular
to
order,
Orr,
please.
who's
Let
then
us
giving
bring the
them to
director of the FBI to answer those questions. The gentleman cannot answer.
Well,
He's asked and answered.
The American people
He's asked and answered. He cannot answer.
The gentlewoman.
Let's have Director Ray.
The regular order is.
I understand, Mr. Chairman, regular order.
The FBI has now instructed Mr. Strzok that he can answer additional questions, and Mr.
Agent Strzok, I asked him other
has
questions.
additional time to get the answers to those questions that earlier was stored and didn't get it.
The FBI approved.
Has the FBI also given you permission to say if Glenn Simpson is the name that you use when in the email where you say Simpson?
I don't believe they have given me guidance. My most recent understanding of my guidance from the FBI is in response to the question of whether the FBI received documents from Mr. Orr. The answer is that yes, we did, and that's all I'm authorized to say.
Has the FBI given you information to tell me whether you knew Nellie Orr worked for Fusion at the time you were meeting with her husband?
Sir, to my knowledge, the FBI has not directed me to or allow me to respond to that.
All right. I yield back. Thank you.
The committee will stand in recess until immediately after this series of votes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano in New York. You've been listening to lawmakers grill Peter Strzok on Capitol Hill. Strzok is the FBI agent who sent anti-Trump texts while he was taking part in election-related investigations in 2016. Strzok has denied that his personal bias impacted his work, but Republican lawmakers have begged to disagree. This has been a marathon hearing that started just after 10 a.m. Eastern Time. In all, Strzok has faced roughly 6 hours of questioning. We will unpack this hearing in just a moment. But we begin tonight's Red and Blue with President Trump reaffirming the U.S. commitment to NATO after a tense summit